I woke up on a freezing cold brick bed to the sound of my little sister crying that she was hungry. My mother was holding her, trying to get her to sleep so she wouldn't feel the hunger anymore. Then I saw the calendar on the wall, November 9th, 1979. I'd been reborn. Somehow I came back to the time before everything fell apart. In my past life, our family was destroyed. My father used to be a truck driver, but 4 years ago he crashed while saving government cargo. He saved everything but got blamed for it. His leg was crippled, and nobody compensated us. After the farmland got divided up, we drew the worst lot. Over an acre of dry, rocky ground that barely grew anything. Then I got into a fight trying to save a woman named Li Hongmei from some thugs. They beat me unconscious with a shovel. Worse, they faked injury reports and demanded 300 yuan from my family, a fortune we didn't have. The woman I saved turned on me and told everyone I was the one who started trouble. In my previous life, my second sister sold herself into a miserable marriage for half the debt money. My little sister was taken away to cover the rest and was tortured to death. My father went limping after the people responsible and never came back. My mother died of grief that New Year's Eve. I lost everyone. I ended up joining a secret military unit on the border, trained like a madman for 7 years just to get revenge. But by the time I came back, the people who destroyed my family had already died in some accident. I had nothing left to live for and wasted away alone. Now I was back, and everything hadn't happened yet. I swore I'd make those people pay and keep my family safe this time. My mother told me the situation. Those men had already stolen all our food, beaten my uncle, and forced my crippled father to sign a debt note for 300 yuan due before the new year. I told her I was going into the mountains to hunt. She begged me not to, terrified I'd die in the cold, but I grabbed my father's old hunting bow, a quiver of homemade arrows, and a sharp woodcutting knife, and headed out into the snow. The village sat right at the edge of the great Shingon Mountains. The cold was brutal, wind cut like a blade, snow up past my ankles. My body was weak and starving. After half an hour of trudging uphill, I was drenched in sweat and seeing black spots. I leaned against a pine tree to catch my breath. Then I heard it, a pheasant calling from a nearby thicket. Old instincts kicked in. I crouched low, crept forward without a sound, drew an arrow, and let it fly. The arrow hit. I heard the bird thrashing in the bushes. But I froze, not because of the kill, but because a glowing blue screen had appeared floating in the air right in front of me. It read, "Congratulations, host. The point-adding hunting system has been activated." The blue screen floated in front of me like something out of a science fiction movie. I reached out to touch it, but my fingers passed right through. It was just light, not solid. The pheasant was still thrashing in the snow, so I snapped back to reality. I grabbed it, slit its throat with my knife, cleaned the arrow, and stuffed the bird into my basket. Then I looked at the screen more carefully. It called itself the point-adding hunting system. Hunting with weapons would raise my skill levels. I was at beginner archery after that one kill. The system was level 1 and needed 100 successful hunts to level up. But the best part was the starter reward, a storage space, 10 meters in every direction, controlled by thought alone. Time stood still inside it, and I could store anything that wasn't alive. I tested it right away. The pheasant vanished from my hand, then reappeared when I willed it back. I tried putting myself inside. Nothing happened. Storage only. I found a sheltered spot behind some rocks, built a rough stone stove, plucked the pheasant as best I could, and roasted it on a heated stone slab. No salt, no seasoning, just burned, gamey meat. It tasted terrible, but the warmth spreading into my empty stomach felt like salvation. After eating half the bird, I stored the rest in my space along with the bow and basket. With just the knife in hand, I pushed deeper into the forest. Every time I swung the blade and hit something, a dead branch, a vine, I heard a chime in my head. Knife skill 1. I checked my personal panel. My basic knife skill was already at 65 out of 100 for the beginner level, so I kept swinging, chopping everything in my path. After going more than 10 miles in, I was at the real edge of the Great Shingon Mountains. My legs felt like lead. I gripped the knife with both hands and slammed it into a tree trunk as hard as I could. The notification came. Basic knife skill upgraded to intermediate. What happened next was beyond anything I expected. A cool energy flooded into my brain and spread through my whole body. Suddenly, I understood things I'd never been taught. How to shift my weight, how to use my waist and core to drive a swing, how to find the perfect angle with minimum effort for maximum damage. It was like I'd been using a knife for 20 years. The blade felt like an extension of my arm. I tested it on a dead branch as thick as my wrist. One casual swing. It fell clean off, the cut smooth as glass. The intermediate level was already far beyond everything I'd learned in my previous life's military training. But the upgrade came at a cost. Seconds after I shot a squirrel to test my archery and got another skill point, a wave of hunger hit me like nothing I'd ever felt. My stomach cramped, my vision went black, every cell in my body screamed for food. The level up had burned through massive energy. I barely managed to skin the squirrel, roast it over a small fire, and force down the half-raw meat. It wasn't enough, but it took the edge off. I knew I had to get out. The smell of blood could attract predators, and in my condition, even a wild boar could kill me. I still had most of the pheasant in my storage space, enough so my family wouldn't go to bed hungry tonight. I turned toward home, but less than half a mile down the trail, a chill ran through me. The kind that comes from being watched by something that wants to eat you. The hair on the back of my neck stood straight up. I'd heard it, the faint snap of a twig under a paw. I spun around, and my heart dropped. 10 meters away, two big, gaunt wolves slid out from behind the trees. Gray fur, lean and hungry, one on each side, closing in on me like a trap. Their green eyes glowed in the dim light, locked on me like I was already meat. They moved almost silently through the snow, breathing out clouds of white fog, growling low in their throats. These were experienced adult wolves, working as a team. Every muscle in my body went tight. I'd dealt with wolves in my past life on the border, so I knew how cunning they were. But there was no panic in me, just cold focus and the desperation of a man with nowhere to run. I pulled an arrow and drew the bow to full, aiming at the bigger wolf on my left. It seemed to sense the danger and ducked behind a tree, snarling to hold my attention. That was the trick. While I was watching the left one, the right wolf had crept up behind me through the bushes without a sound. I heard its snarl explode right at my back, and it launched itself at my neck, fangs wide open. Pure instinct saved me. I twisted my body hard to the right, barely dodging the bite, and released the arrow, not at the wolf in front, but at the one flying at me from behind. At point-blank range, the arrow punched straight through its open mouth, pierced the back of its skull, and came out the other side of its neck. The wolf slammed into the snow at my feet, twitched a few times, and went still. Blood poured out, staining the snow red. No time to breathe. The second wolf saw its partner die and went berserk. It charged from behind the tree, 10 meters closed in a blink. Its jaws were already at my face. I could see down its throat. I threw the bow aside and ripped the knife from my belt. Instead of backing away, I stepped forward and to the side, slipping just past the killing angle of its bite. As the wolf's body flew past me, I swung. The intermediate knife skill took over completely. My arm, wrist, waist, everything moved in perfect coordination. The blade traced along the seam between jawbone and skull, then kept going. One long cut from its mouth all the way to its back, half a meter deep. The wolf crashed into the snow a few steps ahead and didn't move. Its rib cage was split open, inside spilling out onto the white ground. One strike. Instant kill. Even after everything I'd seen in my past life, I stood there gasping, heart pounding. The intermediate knife skill was terrifying. That cut was cleaner and deadlier than anything I'd ever learned in Special Forces training. It was like art. The blood smell was spreading fast through the cold air. Wolves, boars, bears, maybe even a tiger, anything could come. I tied both wolf carcasses with vines and threw them into my storage space to seal off the scent, then started dragging myself toward home. By the time I saw the village outline through the darkness, I was completely spent. I pulled one wolf body and my basket back out of storage and dragged them behind me through the snow. Near the village entrance, I spotted figures struggling through the storm toward the mountains, my family. My crippled father leaning on a stick, my mother and second sister holding each other up, little Xiaoya clinging to mother's coat. They'd come looking for me because I hadn't come home before dark. Xiaoya spotted me first. Her scream cut through the wind. "Ma, it's third brother. He's back." She broke free and ran at me, a tiny stumbling figure in the snow. She crashed into my arms so hard that my legs gave out, and I fell back into the snow with her. I didn't care about the cold. I just held her, so thin, so small, so real. My eyes burned and my vision blurred. Easy, silly girl, I said, my voice rough. You're going to break me. She scrambled up, her little face full of guilt, but then she saw what I'd been dragging behind me. In the faint snow light, the wolf's snarling head with its bared fangs and the dark trail of blood were impossible to miss. She screamed, "Wolf? There's a wolf!" Xiaoya's scream made me jump, but when I looked behind me there was nothing, just the dead wolf lying still in the snow. I flicked her forehead gently and told her not to worry. It's dead. Tonight, your brother's feeding you wolf meat. As much as you can eat. My mother came running over, and when she saw me sitting in the snow, her face went white. Then she saw the wolf. She and my father both froze like they'd been struck by lightning. All the grief, hunger, fear, and despair my mother had been holding in finally broke loose. Tears poured down her weathered face. She couldn't speak, just reached out with her cracked, frostbitten hands, wanting to touch my face but afraid of hurting the wound on my head. Looking at her cry like that, my heart felt like someone was squeezing it. I forced myself to stand and gave her the biggest smile I could manage. "Ma, it's all right. Tonight we eat meat. All you can eat." She just kept nodding, crying even harder, but they were happy tears now. My father didn't say much, he never did. He just grunted, put his pipe away, and took the heavy wolf carcass from me. That was his way. We walked home together through the deepening snow, the whole family shuffling toward our little mud brick house with its faint lamplight. Inside, the kitchen told the story of how badly we'd been robbed. The cooking stove was empty. Those thugs had even taken our only iron pot as debt payment, worse than loan sharks. My blood boiled thinking about them and whoever was backing them up. But I held it in. Rushing off to get revenge would only get me locked up or killed. And then who'd take care of my parents? Who'd be the backbone for my sisters when they married? I had to be patient and plan carefully. I sent my mother to borrow a pot from our neighbor, Li Shue's family. Ma was beaming. She couldn't stop smiling even through her tears. She could tell I'd changed. Instead of running off to cause trouble like before, I'd gone hunting and come back with a wolf. That gave her hope. But the 300 yuan debt still weighed on her like a boulder. My second sister Xiaoyu lit the kitchen fire, and I warmed myself by it for a few minutes before getting to work on the wolf. My body was completely drained, but my intermediate knife skill made all the difference. The blade moved like it had a mind of its own, finding every joint and seam in the bones. I stripped the skin off in one clean piece, fast and efficient. Xiaoya crouched right next to me, poking the warm meat with her little fingers. My father and second sister watched with their mouths open. They could tell. This was better than anything the old village butcher could do after a lifetime of practice. I looked at that nearly perfect wolf pelt and wondered what it would be like when my knife skill reached advanced level. Could I really carve like the legendary butcher from the old stories, cutting through an ox without ever hitting bone? Right then I made myself a promise. In this life, my family would never go hungry again. First goal, meat on the table every day and more grain than we could eat. Then I heard a bright voice from the yard. "Dongha, Auntie says you killed a wolf. Where is it?" It was Li Shue, the girl next door. Even in the dim lamplight and snow glow, she was striking. Long black braid, sharp eyebrows, pretty eyes, a pink mouth with a stubborn set to it. She was 19, beautiful, but nobody in the village dared send a matchmaker to her door. She had the sharpest tongue around. One sentence from her could shut down any man trying something shady. People called her Little Pepper, but underneath that tough shell, she was one of the kindest people I knew. She'd always been good to my family, never looked down on me even when everyone else treated me like a street thug. Her father had been a sent-down city youth who married her mother, the village leader's daughter, just to avoid hard labor. He never registered the marriage. The moment he got permission to return to the city, he abandoned them without a word. That's what made Li Shue the way she was. If she'd been meek, people would have walked all over her and her mother. Her uncles on her mother's side were fiercely protective, doing most of her farm work, so she barely had to go to the fields. They just worried about when she'd find a good man to marry. But if I remembered right, in my past life, she didn't marry until she was 27. Later, I heard the villagers say she'd been waiting for me, waiting for someone who'd disappeared. After I joined that classified military unit, my identity was erased, my household registration canceled. To everyone back home, I was as good as dead, but Li Shuen never believed it. She kept waiting. Thinking about that, my nose stung and my eyes got hot. Li Shui came over carrying a basket with salt and spices under a blue cloth. She asked where the wolf was, and I pointed her to the kitchen. When she saw the pile of meat on the cutting board and the wolf's skin on the floor, her eyes lit up. "When did you get so capable?" she asked, surprised but clearly pleased. I played it down, told her when a wolf's trying to kill you, you don't have much choice. She called me a liar but couldn't hide her smile. I noticed her throat bob when she looked at the meat. Her family wasn't much better off than mine. Even with her uncles helping out, meat was a rare luxury. Pork cost 9 cents a pound at the supply store, and most of the time you couldn't even buy it with money. The best her family managed was a single pound at New Year, chopped fine and mixed into radish dumplings. I told her the wolf had over 40 pounds of meat after cleaning and invited her to bring her mother over. Tonight, we'd eat our fill. She shook her head and scolded me, saying my father would beat me with his shoe for wasting it. She was right that I could trade it for enough cornmeal and sorghum to last months. My father was thinking the same thing, but he kept quiet. In his mind, with that 300 yuan debt hanging over us and me possibly heading to prison, he figured we might as well eat one good meal. I told Li Shui I'd handle the grain problem later at the village chief's place and asked her to cook since she was actually good at it. That was my way of giving her an excuse to stay for dinner. Otherwise, her stubborn pride would have sent her home. She rolled up her sleeves and got to work. In that kitchen, she picked out the wolf hearts and tossed them aside. Haven't you heard the saying about wolf hearts? My grandpa taught me. Those are poisonous. I realized I was just getting in the way, so I stepped out. I caught her watching me as I left, but I didn't think much of it at the time. What I knew from my past life, though, told me plenty. Back when she was 16, some thug named Li Ergu tried to assault her and her mother in the mountains. I happened to be nearby setting rabbit traps and beat the guy senseless. After that, she'd quietly kept an eye on me. She knew I wasn't really the useless troublemaker everyone said I was. I just refused to work for production team work points, so the whole village labeled me a bum. But I'd never once bullied anyone in our village. She'd turned away every matchmaker who came to her door. In my previous life, she didn't marry until 27, and the villagers said she'd been waiting for me the whole time, even after my identity was erased and everyone assumed I was dead. She never stopped believing I was alive. I couldn't dwell on that now. I divided up the remaining meat, kept one wolf leg to take with me, and set the pelt aside for my mother to tan. I wasn't going to sell it. I planned to make 2 wolf fur hats for the deep winter. In the worst of the cold, going outside without a hat meant losing your ears to frostbite. I knew that from experience. My second sister Xiaoyu joined Li Shui in the kitchen. The wolf meat went into the borrowed iron pot with plain water, a handful of coarse yellow salt, and some peppercorns. That was all we had. But the smell of boiling meat filled the yard like nothing had in over a year. Last New Year, we'd eaten porridge made with ground-up corn cobs mixed into the meal. It scraped your throat going down and was even worse coming out. Xiaoya squatted at the kitchen doorway, fingers in her mouth, drool running down her chin. "Brother, isn't the meat ready yet?" I laughed and told her to be patient. Then I remembered something important. Stomachs that hadn't seen grease in ages would rebel if we ate too much rich meat at once. Practically guaranteed to make everyone sick. I grabbed the wolf leg, put it in my basket, and told my mother I was heading to the village chief's house to talk business and trade for some grain. I walked a few minutes through the snow and knocked on the old chief's gate. He'd helped our family when he could over the years, but he had to be fair to the whole village. He couldn't show too much favoritism without people talking. The old village chief opened his door and called me inside, then immediately told his son Taiju to go fetch 20 pounds of potatoes and some pickled cabbage from the cellar. Tieju's wife was in her postpartum rest, so I stayed outside. Village custom said you shouldn't barge in during that time. The chief knew what had happened to my family. He sighed and said he understood I'd been set up by those people from Li Family Village. They'd shown up with fake hospital papers threatening to send me to prison. He said he wished he could lead the whole village over there to fight, but making a scene would only make things worse for me. He told me to swallow my anger for now. Taiju came out with a bulging sack, over 20 pounds of potatoes and a small bag of cornmeal. He shoved it into my hands and said he'd bring more once those thugs weren't watching. He was worried they'd just steal it again if he gave too much at once. Then he pulled 2 crumpled 10 yuan bills from his pocket and stuffed them in my coat. "That's all the cash we have. Take it. They hadn't even waited for me to ask. I'd grown up following Taiju around like a little shadow. We were that close. My chest felt hot with gratitude. I pulled out the wolf leg and tried to give it to him for his wife's recovery soup. Tieju's eyes went wide when he saw the bloody leg. Then his face got red, and he shoved it back at me, almost angry. You think I'm that kind of person? This food and money was already set aside for you. If you hadn't come, I would have brought it tonight. Don't waste good wolf meat on us. Go trade it for cash. When those debt collectors come back, we'll scrape together what we can and beg them for more time. The chief clapped my shoulder and told me my father was a tough man, and I was no different. But he warned me to stay out of the deep mountains. Without an experienced hunter, I'd end up as bear food. I couldn't give up on hunting, though. That was the real reason I'd come. I asked if I could borrow the old Type 38 rifle the village kept in storage. The chief's face darkened. He didn't want me going back into those mountains. But I laid it out straight. If I didn't take this gamble, where would 300 yuan come from? I wasn't going to let the whole village starve on my account. I told him if something happened to me in the mountains, my family still had my cousin Yuan Chao to carry on. He went quiet for a long time, then sighed and told Taiju to get the gun. Taiju brought out a weathered Type 38 rifle, oiled and well-kept, with a rusted iron box containing 50 bullets, the last of their supply. The chief said the commune armory sold more at 50 cents each. He let me take the gun but laid down the rule. If I brought back anything big, I had to share meat with the village. The rifle belonged to the collective, so people had a right to some of the kill. Otherwise there'd be talk, and he'd be caught in the middle. I agreed without hesitation. He also wrote me an official letter of introduction with a red stamp, telling me that if I got something valuable, I should go straight to the county meat processing plant to sell it and pay down the debt first. Walking home through the quiet village road with the rifle on my back and the grain sack in my hand, I felt warm inside despite the cold. This village, Chun Family Village, was full of people who'd been through hell together. Our ancestors had migrated here generations ago, survived the Japanese occupation, fought in the Civil War, sent men to Korea. The old generation of men who'd made it through all that numbered fewer than 50. We were descendants of loyal, brave people. Lee Family Village was different. Fewer soldiers, more people who'd stayed behind, which meant their population outgrew ours. They'd always pushed us around over water rights and petty disputes because they had the numbers. I shook off those heavy thoughts and walked into our yard. Xiaoyao was crouched by the kitchen door with tear streaks on her face and her lips puffed out in a pout, staring through the crack in the door. The meat smell filled the whole yard and spilled over the walls. "Brother, can we eat the meat now?" she cried when she saw me. The meat was already falling off the bone. My mother had been waiting for me before lifting the lid. Everyone was staring at me with desperate, hungry eyes. But I shook my head. I told them to cut up the potatoes and add them to the pot to thicken it. Our stomachs hadn't seen grease in a year. Eating too much rich meat at once would wreck our guts. Better to stretch it out in a thick stew and store portions in clay jars for several days. My mother looked at the bubbling pot, then at my thin face, and almost said something but held back. My father sat against the wall, silent as always, just puffing his pipe a little louder than usual. I set down the rifle and the sack of potatoes and cornmeal, then lifted the pot lid. The smell of stewing wolf meat hit me in a wave. The chunks were bobbing in dark broth alongside half-transparent potatoes soaked through with fat. Not quite done, but the smell was incredible. I told my second sister to cut more potatoes into the pot. They'd soak up the flavor and stretch the meal. Whatever we didn't eat tonight, we'd ladle into clay jars. The broth would set into jelly overnight, and we could reheat it for days. My mother watched me dump potatoes into that rich pot, and I could see the pain flash across her face. She was thinking this might be our last good meal before I got hauled off to prison. She turned away and wiped her eyes with her sleeve. I divided the meat, enough for 2 or 3 meals for us, and 2 portions to send to my second and third uncle's families. Their kids deserved a taste of meat too. Then I noticed Li Shui had already left. She'd only taken a small piece of meat home. That wasn't right. She'd done all the cooking. I scooped out a big bowl to bring to her family. My mother saw me fussing over that and asked quietly, "Donghe, what do you think of Li Shui? Do you like her?" I froze mid-scoop, coughed awkwardly, and told her now wasn't the time. I was carrying 300 yuan in debt with no idea how to pay it. My only thought was putting food in our bowls and warm clothes on our backs. Li Shui was wonderful. I wasn't blind, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't like her. But I had no right to drag a girl into this mess. I couldn't ask someone to share a life where we didn't know where the next meal was coming from. From the dark corner of the yard, my father suddenly banged his pipe against the frozen ground. His voice came out hard and heavy. Who said I was in charge of this family? Was I arranging everything now? Then he told me my third aunt had come by while I was out. She'd brought 60 yuan. Getting money out of my third uncle was no small thing. The man was stubborn, and it must have taken real effort. My father said he'd go to the county seat tomorrow and beg old connections for more. Once we scraped together enough to pay the debt, I was to keep my head down and stop causing trouble. There wouldn't be a next time. My mother snapped at him. For once she pushed back, telling him not to ruin the one decent meal we'd had in ages by saying depressing things. The boy had changed, she said. He'd killed a wolf. I listened quietly, but my heart was sinking. I knew exactly how this played out. In my previous life, my father had made that same trip to the county. His old army friends took one look at his crippled leg and heard about the debt, and their faces changed. Polite excuses at best, cold mockery at worst. In the end, only a few genuinely close relatives scraped together less than 40 yuan. It was never going to be enough. And then those thugs came back, kicked down our door, and ripped my screaming little sister out of my mother's arms. I could still see the ringleader Li Ergu's greedy, vicious eyes and hear Xiaoya's shriek. Brother! Mama! A wave of killing rage surged up inside me so violently I nearly lost control. I crushed it back down. At that same instant, my father's head snapped toward me. His eyes locked on mine like a hawk's. He'd felt it, that flash of bloodlust coming off me. He was an old soldier who'd crawled through battlefields and survived. And he told me later that what he sensed in that moment was more chilling than being under a sniper's aim. It shook even him. I steadied my breathing and told my mother not to blame my father. He was right to warn me. The beating I took wasn't for nothing. It was a lesson. Then I pointed at the Type 38 rifle leaning against the wall and told them my plan. From now on, I'm going to make a living off that mountain. I wasn't as good a farmer as my father or the other men in the village, but I had strength, sharp eyes, and steady legs from years of running through forest. With this rifle, as long as I stayed out of the deepest wilderness and kept my wits about me, I could hunt. Our family needed a way to earn money, and this was mine. My mother stared at me. I could see her swallowing back all her objections. The determination in my eyes wasn't something she recognized from her old reckless son. Finally, she just sighed, her breath fogging in the cold air. The mountains are so cold. The wind at night cuts right through. My father got up and limped over to the rifle. He ran his hand along the barrel slowly, like he was greeting an old comrade. Do you know how to use it? He asked quietly. Without waiting for my answer, he took the gun apart. He frowned at what he found. The bolt channel was dry, starting to rust. It needed tung oil. We didn't have any, so I brought him a small bowl of wolf fat skimmed from the cooking pot. He applied it carefully to every joint and groove, cleaning and oiling each piece with the practiced rhythm of a veteran. I watched every move and memorized it. When he handed the gun to me, my first attempts were clumsy, but something clicked fast. My fingers found their way as if the knowledge had been sleeping inside them. The disassembly and reassembly got faster and smoother with each try. My father watched my hands moving over those cold steel parts, and I saw something shift behind his eyes, surprise, confusion, and something deeper. He swallowed hard. All right, he muttered, almost to himself, with a trace of pride he couldn't quite hide. You've got the makings. The Chun family doesn't raise cowards. He'd always known, deep down, that I wasn't truly rotten. If I had been, he wouldn't have settled for just scolding me. He would have beaten me for real long ago. I set the oiled rifle in the corner and thought about what else we needed. We didn't even have our own iron pot. During the old collectivization days, everything metal had been confiscated for steel production. Pots, knives, even door hinges. When land got divided back to families, nobody gave any of it back. A decent iron pot cost over 10 yuan at the supply store, almost half a month's wages for a factory worker in the county. The stew was finally ready. I filled big rough porcelain bowls for everyone, half golden potato chunks soaked with grease, half dark braised wolf meat. Under the dim kerosene lamp, nobody spoke, just the sounds of slurping and chewing. Xiaoya burned her tongue on the hot meat, but refused to spit it out. eyes watering as she nodded furiously when my mother scolded her for not thanking me. Thank you, brother, she mumbled with her mouth full. I laughed watching her, but my heart ached. I swore she'd never go without meat again. I cleaned my bowl, but was still far from full. My shrunken stomach couldn't handle more. I divided the leftovers into clay jars, then loaded a big portion into the borrowed iron pot to return to Li Shui's family. My father got up too, saying he'd visit my second uncle. He started ranting about how my second uncle was a hothead who'd jumped into the fight without thinking. Second uncle worked at the lumber yard, a real job, and if he'd seriously hurt someone, he could have lost everything. My father was the eldest brother, the only person who could keep second uncle in line. One look from him, and second uncle would shrink like a scolded kid. My third uncle, Chun Jianjun, was the sharpest of the three brothers. He drove trucks for the county transport team, a job that was actually arranged as quiet compensation for my father taking the blame for that accident years ago. The transport team feared my father, an old combat veteran, might raise hell about the injustice, so they gave his younger brother a position to keep him quiet. My father swallowed his pride for his brother's future. If third uncle had been home when those thugs came, with his cunning and ruthlessness, some of them probably wouldn't have walked away. I told my second sister Xiaoyu to take Xiaoya and deliver a portion of meat to third aunt's house. Third uncle was away driving, and his wife was alone. The girls going would be more appropriate. Then I carried the heavy, steaming iron pot out to Li Shui's house next door, about 200 meters away. My hands were full, so I couldn't knock. I just called out from behind the wall, "Shui, you asleep?" She definitely wasn't asleep. She'd been lying on her heated bed listening to her stomach growl after spending the evening cooking meat she barely got to taste. When she heard my voice, she shot up like a spring. Her mother Lu Yufan mumbled sleepily from the other end of the bed, wondering why I was coming by so late. Li Shui threw on her old cotton coat and rushed out. She saw the pot heaped with meat and potatoes, still steaming in the night air, and her eyes went soft. She opened the gate and I grinned at her. "Your brother's treating you to a late-night meal. Wake Annie up too. Eat while it's hot." She bit her lip. "This is way too much." "Your family." I cut her off. "It's not too much. If I don't catch anything tomorrow, I'll need to borrow this pot again anyway. We're neighbors eating from the same pot. Don't be polite with me." Then, I added, half joking, half serious, "Besides, if someday I don't make it back from the mountain, I'll need you to look after my parents and Xiaoya." Her eyes flashed with anger. "Don't you dare say that. Spit 3 times right now." "That's bad luck?" I spat 3 times on the ground with an apologetic grin, and she calmed down. She brought out a big clay jar and started transferring the food. Then, without looking up, she said quietly, "I'm going into the mountain with you tomorrow." I nearly dropped the pot. I told her she was crazy. Going alone was dangerous enough, and if I took her along, her uncles would beat me to death. I'd never be able to explain it. "If you don't take me," she looked up, eyes glinting in the moonlight, stubborn and sly, "I'll tell my uncles you took advantage of me." Her face turned red the second she said it, but she held her ground. My mind went blank imagining her ox-sized uncles cornering me. I begged her not to joke like that. "Fine, I won't say it," she blurted out, her face and neck burning red. "But then you have to come be a helper husband for my family." That phrase, helper husband, was a local arrangement where a man basically helped out a woman's household like a second partner. My brain short-circuited. I spun around, eyes wide. "What did you just say? Helper husband? Since when do you have a man? How come I don't know about this?" Li Shui kicked me in the shin for my stupid question. "You're the one with a man," she snapped. I winced and put the empty pot down, rubbing my leg. "Do you even know what helper husband actually means?" She puffed up her neck, face burning red. "It just means finding a capable man to support the family, right? It's just me and my mom. Whoever marries me has to take care of her too. Isn't that what it means?" I realized she'd gotten the term completely wrong. She had no idea about the humiliating reality behind it. It actually meant a woman whose husband was crippled but still alive, bringing in another man to do the farm work by day and share her bed at night. I explained it to her as gently as I could. Her face went so red I thought she might faint. She was mortified and furious at the same time. She lunged to grab my ear. I dodged, and she stumbled straight into my chest. We both froze, faces inches apart, breath visible in the cold air between us. Even through layers of thick cotton, I noticed things I probably shouldn't have. She shoved me away with a yelp and ran inside, forgetting her jar of meat on the stone table. I shook my head, carried the food into her kitchen, lit the stove, and heated everything back up. The smell filled the house. I knew she couldn't resist it for long. Inside, her mother Lu Yufan spoke to her quietly in the dark. She said she could tell Li Shui had feelings for me, and she wouldn't stand in the way, but Li Shui had to wait until my debt was settled. She didn't want her daughter repeating her own mistake, waiting for a man who never came back. Li Shui fired back, angry and hurt, that her father hadn't visited once in 19 years despite his promises. Her mother cut her off sharply, then softened. She still believed he'd return. Li Shui jumped off the bed and stormed out. She found me in the kitchen, face tight, eyes a little red. She got straight to the point. How much money do you actually have right now? I blinked. She pressed harder. 2 days left before the deadline. 300 yuan or prison. How much was I still short? Then she said something that knocked the wind out of me. Tomorrow I'm going to my uncle's. We'll scrape together every last coin, even if we have to sell the pot off the stove. You can pay them back later. But after this, you take care of me and my mom. Her voice trembled at the end. She stared at me without blinking, terrified I'd hesitate or say no. Looking at those bright, frightened eyes, remembering what the villagers had said in my past life about her waiting years for me, I finally understood with absolute clarity. It was all true. This girl had put me at the center of her heart. I'd always thought we were just close friends. I'd been blind. When I stayed quiet too long, she panicked and pinched my side hard. Say something. If you don't answer, I'm taking it as a yes. My uncles actually like you. They said you were a real man when you saved me that time. Her voice kept dropping until the last part, which she practically shouted. Chen Donghe, I like you. Is that clear enough? I rubbed my side, genuinely moved. Shui, I feel like a gold brick just fell out of the sky and hit me on the head. What did I do to deserve this? But she took it the wrong way. Her eyes went red and her voice cracked. You don't want me? Are you still thinking about that Li Hongmei from Li family village? Just tell me, yes or no. If it's yes, forget everything I said tonight. We'll just be neighbors. I waved my hands frantically. No, absolutely not. Li Hongmei means nothing to me. I helped her and she stabbed me in the back, testified against me with those thugs, said I started the whole thing. I was blind to help that ungrateful woman. The tension drained from Li Shui's face. Tears still hung in her eyes, but her hand reached out and grabbed the corner of my coat, her voice small and shaky. Then, do you want to? Be with me? My heart surged. Every last hesitation melted away. I put on a serious face, held up 3 fingers, and said, yes. 100 times yes. But we need 3 rules. She blinked, confused, heart obviously racing. I folded 1 finger. First, no more hitting me. Especially no pinching my waist or twisting my ears. 2nd finger down. Second, that knife tongue of yours? You have to be gentler with me. At least a little. I held up the last finger solemnly. Third, on big decisions, I'm in charge. At least in front of other people, you give me face. If I'm actually wrong, you can deal with me however you want at home. I'll kneel on the washboard if I have to. She burst out laughing through her tears, nodding hard, cheeks flushed pink. Okay, I'll listen to you. Is that enough? Her voice came out so soft and sweet, it was like a completely different person. Looking at her like that, shy, stubborn, beautiful, something gave way in my chest. I opened my arms, pulled her close, and leaned in to whisper with a grin. So, can I get a kiss? Li Shui went stiff for a second, then quickly stood on her tiptoes and brushed her lips against my cheek. Barely a touch before she pulled back, ears burning red. There, I kissed you. You're not allowed to take it back. Never, I said, holding her tight, grinning like an idiot. She shoved me toward the gate, flustered and blushing. Go home. It's late. Tomorrow I'll go to my uncle's and borrow money to pay off your debt. I grabbed the doorframe on my way out. Leave the debt to me. But the day after tomorrow, when those guys come to collect, have your uncles come stand with me. With them there, Li family village won't dare push too hard. She leaned against the door after I left, hands pressed to her burning cheeks, heart still racing. She couldn't believe she'd actually said everything out loud. But it had worked. I liked her back. I walked home with a warm glow in my chest, feet lighter than they'd been in ages. My second sister Xiaoyu met me at the gate with a warm cornmeal cake. I know that one bowl didn't fill your bottomless pit, she said with a smile. She told me my father had come back from second uncle's house in a better mood, and that third aunt had stopped by to say she'd go to her parents' home tomorrow to borrow money. That hit me hard. Third Aunt Wang Xiaolan was a city girl who'd married my third uncle and moved her household registration to our village, nearly cutting ties with her own family over it. She'd never once gone back to borrow money, and now she was doing it for me. I told Xiaoyu to go first thing in the morning and stop her. Tell her I had a plan. I'd handle the debt myself. That night, I fried a few cornmeal cakes in the last of the wolf fat and buried some potatoes in the dying coals for tomorrow's rations. My father sat on the edge of the bed smoking in silence. I could see the weight on him, a man who'd once charged across battlefields, now unable to even follow his son into the mountains on a crippled leg. I didn't know the right words to comfort him. His love had always been the silent kind, and it took living a second life to truly understand how heavy it was. The next morning I woke at first light, stomach growling. Last night's meal had burned through completely, but my body felt stronger, no more wobbling legs. I ate reheated wolf meat stew with cornmeal cakes, making sure I was properly fueled. I checked my gear carefully. The Type 38 rifle went on my back. I'd opened the ammunition box the night before, 50 gleaming brass rounds. I'd handled every kind of firearm in my past life, and though I'd never shot this particular model, the mechanics were the same. A few practice shots to learn the recoil, and I'd have it mastered. In a couple years, once the newer Type 81 assault rifle became available, I'd save up for one. Even a tiger couldn't survive a burst from that. I also carried the bamboo bow and arrows at my waist for smaller game. Pheasants and rabbits weren't worth a rifle round. The hunting knife rode in its leather sheath at the small of my back. I stepped out into the cold, the 300 yuan debt pressing on my mind like a stone. I knew it was extortion, but in this era, with fake witnesses and forged medical papers, I had no way to fight it through any official channel. My ears caught a familiar clucking from a thicket nearby. I stashed the rifle and pack into my system space, pulled out the bow, and waited. A colorful rooster pheasant burst from the bushes. I drew and released in one motion. The arrow punched through it mid-flight. It tumbled into the snow without even a cry. Into the space it went. Time froze inside that pocket, so everything stayed perfectly fresh. Good start. Maybe today would bring something bigger. I pushed deeper, swinging my knife at every branch in my path, stacking up those skill points toward advanced level. The intermediate knife skill already surpassed everything I'd learned in my previous life's military training. If I reached advanced, I might truly achieve the legendary level, cutting through bone and sinew as effortlessly as a master butcher. My target today was a bear den. In deep winter, bears hibernated. Find the den, toss a firecracker inside, and the furious animal would charge out disoriented. At close range, the Type 38 could punch through inches of iron plate. Bear skull wouldn't stand a chance. I trekked for hours through snow that sometimes reached my thighs. Around what I guessed was noon, I stopped on a high ridge to rest and eat. Good vantage point. I could see the whole valley below, and nothing could sneak up on me. I built a small fire, roasted the leftover half pheasant on a sharpened stick, and ate it with toasted cornmeal cakes. A pound and a half of bird disappeared fast, and only got me 80% full. After carefully smothering the fire, I crossed the second ridge and immediately dropped flat, holding my breath. Below me was a sheltered, south-facing valley where the snow had melted away, exposing patches of brown moss and lichen. Several goat-sized animals were calmly grazing on the sparse greenery. My heart jumped. Roe deer. The famously stupid roe deer. Roe deer usually move in groups. I only saw 6, which meant a bigger herd was probably scattered nearby, feeding in smaller clusters. The problem was distance, at least 1,000 meters of open ground between us. The moment I left the ridge, they'd spot me and bolt. But I'd already noticed something useful. This valley was a dead end. Steep cliffs blocked the far side, and the only way out was the narrow entrance. If I spooked them, they'd run deeper in, hit the wall, and come right back to me. I crept backward off the ridge and spent nearly an hour circling around to the valley mouth, crawling the last stretch through deep snow to muffle any sound. At about 500 or 600 meters, I pulled the Type 38 from my storage space and warmed the bolt in my coat so my stiff fingers could work it. The first shot echoed through the valley. A buck with small antlers dropped without a sound, bullet straight through the eye. The second shot followed almost instantly, hitting a doe through the jaw. She cried out, but went down. The rest panicked and stampeded into the dead-end canyon. Less than 3 minutes later, they came running back. The only exit was right where I was lying. Survival instinct overrode their fear of the gunshots. I dropped the lead deer with a neck shot. The survivors turned and fled back in again. They came back a third time. I shot 2 more. The last one ran into the canyon, and this time I just walked in after it. 1 more clean shot. 6 roe deer. I stood there grinning, heart pounding with excitement. This was a fortune. The meat was tender and prized. The hides could be tanned into winter coats, and the antlers and other parts were valuable too. I swept all 6 bodies into my storage space. I decided not to hunt for the larger herd. The gunfire and blood would have scared them off already. There'd be other chances. The sun was well past its peak. Time to head home. I started calculating what 6 deer might be worth. Then the danger sense hit me. That gut instinct that had saved my life more times than I could count in my previous life. Every muscle locked up, hair standing on end. I didn't think. My body threw itself sideways toward a thick oak tree. I scrambled up like a panicked monkey, tearing my coat on a branch, and didn't stop until I was 4 meters off the ground. I looked down and my stomach dropped. Over 20 wolves had materialized from the trees and snow, fanning out in a loose half circle around my tree. The smaller ones were already within 10 paces of the trunk. My excitement over the deer had made me sloppy. I'd forgotten where I was. At the back of the pack, sitting on a small mound, was their leader. He was massive, a full size bigger than the rest, with iron-gray fur, half his left ear missing, and a dark scar running down his nose. Our eyes met across the cold air. He bared his fangs and let out a low rumble. The circle tightened instantly. 24 hungry wolves pressed in around the base of my tree, drooling, snarling. Then most of them settled down, sitting, lying, licking their fur. They weren't attacking. They were planning to wait me out. I laughed. You think because you can't see a weapon, you've got me trapped? A bow appeared in my hands from the storage space. I could have pulled out the rifle and scattered them with gunfire, but I wanted those wolves. Bullets would send them running. Arrows would let me pick them off while they tried to figure out what was happening. And up in this tree, I was untouchable. I drew and released. The nearest wolf, the one snarling up at me from the base of the trunk, caught the arrow straight through its exposed throat. Blood sprayed across the bark and snow. It clawed at its own neck, gurgling, and was dead in 10 seconds. Second arrow, almost instant. Another wolf tried to dodge sideways, but the shaft punched into its left eye socket. It twisted, crashed down, kicked wildly, and went still. The pack panicked. The wolves near the tree shrank back with their tails tucked. The alpha howled a command, and the whole group pulled back to about 25 meters out, testing my range. I was still well within killing distance. I locked onto a wolf toward the rear and drew. The pack read my movement instantly. 2 or 3 darted behind cover before I even released. Smart, but not smart enough. I fired 3 arrows in rapid succession. The first buried itself in the ribs of a wolf trying to reposition. The second pinned a young wolf to the ground through the back of its neck. The third just barely missed. It grazed a crafty adult wolf across the hip, drawing blood but not killing it. 5 dead wolves on the ground now. The alpha howled in rage, and the remaining 17 or 18 wolves retreated past 100 meters, hiding among the tree line, beyond my bow's effective range. I lowered my arms and let the bow vanish back into storage. The wolves froze. Even the alpha tilted his head, confused. The weapon had simply disappeared. Their limited minds couldn't process it. But hunger won out over confusion. After about 20 minutes, they started creeping forward again, slower this time, using every rock, snowdrift, and tree trunk as cover, spreading out wider so I couldn't hit clusters. They'd learned. I watched their careful approach from above and smiled. I slid down the trunk to a branch about 3 meters off the ground, closer, more tempting. I wanted them nearer, close enough that there'd be nowhere left to hide. A dozen greedy eyes locked onto me from every direction. Finally, the most aggressive wolf in the pack couldn't hold back any longer. It moved. The lead wolf lunged at my tree, claws scraping the bark, snapping at my dangling legs. Others closed in behind it. I looked past them all, straight at the alpha sitting 100 meters back. I'm going to make a nice rug out of your hide, I told it. The alpha snarled, and the whole pack surged toward the tree again. I didn't even need to aim at this range. 3 arrows flew in rapid succession, one through an open mouth, one into a neck, one into an eye socket. 3 wolves dropped almost simultaneously. The rest panicked and bolted toward the tree line without waiting for orders. That's when I switched. The bow vanished, and the Type 38 appeared in my hands. Bolt already pulled back. The alpha saw the rifle and tried to dive behind a tree, but I was faster. The shot cracked through the valley like thunder. The bullet entered through its open jaw and destroyed its brain. The great wolf crashed into the snow and didn't move again. Its broken fang pointed at the gray sky. The pack shattered completely. Every surviving wolf turned tail and fled into the deep forest, howling in terror. I worked the bolt smooth and fast. 5 more shots, 5 more wolves down before the remaining 10 disappeared into the trees. I watched from my perch until I was certain they weren't circling back, then climbed down into blood-soaked snow. These animals had come for revenge. I'd killed 2 yesterday, and today they brought the whole pack. Lesson learned: never let your guard down in these mountains. I walked over to a wounded wolf still clawing weakly at the snow. You're done anyway. Let me make it quick. 1 knife stroke across the throat. Then I got to work. Every carcass needed immediate gutting before the meat went bad. My intermediate knife skill made the process fast and clean. Skin peeled off in 1 piece, organs out in seconds. I hung a wolf heart and a length of intestine on a branch as an offering to the mountain spirit. Old hunter's custom, a show of respect. The intestines and other offal were worth keeping too. In times like these, even factory workers in the city rarely ate meat, let alone village people. Most folks didn't know how to clean and prepare organ meat, but I did. I worked fast. The blood smell was spreading, and in this deep forest, there were things worse than wolves. If a tiger caught the scent, the locals called them mountain gods, for good reason. Those animals could leap over 10 feet, climb trees, swim rivers, and crush a tree trunk as thick as a bowl with 1 swipe of their paw. A human skull wouldn't slow them down. I had 0 interest in meeting one. 14 wolves and 6 roe deer, all stored safely in my frozen time space. I did rough math in my head, trying to figure what it would all fetch at the county market. The trip home was quiet, no more howling. When the village appeared in the distance, I finally relaxed. I stopped where nobody could see me, pulled out 1 skinned and gutted wolf carcass, wrapped it in old plastic sheeting to keep the blood off my coat, and loaded it into my basket along with the hide and organs. Everything else stayed hidden in the space. I walked into the village around 4 or 5 in the afternoon. It was the idle season, and most people were gathered along the south-facing wall, soaking up whatever sun they could get and gossiping. They noticed the heavy basket right away. "Dongha, you went into the mountains again." I gave them a grin that was half real, half deliberately pitiful. "What choice do I have? If I can't pay that money back, you won't be seeing me around much longer." That lit the fuse. People started cursing Li family village, and especially Li Ergu. The loudmouth Auntie Lu smacked her thigh and let loose a string of insults about how he'd faked his injuries, how anyone could see his hospital papers were bogus, how 300 yuan was robbery. An old man chimed in that Li Ergu had relatives at the county hospital who could forge documents as easily as breathing, and someone ought to report them for fraud. I kept smiling and let them vent. I knew most of them were decent people who genuinely felt bad for my family. But I also knew that until recently, nobody in this village had much use for me, the local troublemaker. Their anger was mostly aimed at Li family village's bullying, not born from any deep affection for me. Finally, someone couldn't hold back their curiosity any longer. "Hey Dongha, that basket looks pretty heavy. You catch something good today?" "Shot a wolf," I said casually, picking up my pace toward home. The crowd behind me erupted. Within seconds, everyone who'd been lounging against the sunny wall was on their feet and following me like a parade. I found my father in the yard, sitting on a low stool, splitting bamboo strips to weave baskets. His hands were covered in old scars and fresh cuts from the sharp edges. All that painful work for a few pennies. When he looked up and saw me safe, his eyes brightened with desperate hope. "How'd it go?" I leaned in close so the approaching crowd wouldn't hear. "Pa, we hit the jackpot. Besides this wolf, I got some pheasants and rabbits, but the real haul is 2 roe deer and several more wolves. Too heavy to carry, so I stashed everything at the old spot. First thing tomorrow, I'm taking it all to the county to sell. His fingers froze on the bamboo strip, nearly cutting himself. His eyes went wide, shock, then something close to wild joy. He started worrying immediately about the meat attracting predators, wanting to send my second uncle into the mountains to help retrieve it. I calmed him down, telling him everything was sealed up tight in that hidden cave, the narrow one in the mountain hollow near the village, entrance blocked with heavy stones. He didn't need to know the real secret. The tension finally left his face. I looked at his scarred, frost-bitten hands and the pile of razor-sharp bamboo strips, and something broke inside me. Pa, no more basket weaving. Look at your hands. The money you make doesn't even cover the cost of bandages. From now on, I'll bring home the income. You help me process what I bring back. Tan the hides, smoke the meat. There's plenty to do. I added that this winter, we'd have meat at every meal. I needed to build my strength back up. A stronger body meant I could move faster in the mountains and stay safer. My father's head dropped suddenly. He blinked hard and swiped his rough hand across his face. All right, he said, his voice thick. I'll listen to you. Your old man will be your assistant. By then the villagers had packed our gate, craning their necks to see the bloody basket in the middle of the yard. Old Zhang's booming voice came first. Dongha? A wolf yesterday and another today? How much is that worth? I set the basket where everyone could see and played it straight. I explained that wolf meat sold for 9 cents a pound as clean meat at the county purchasing station, or 5 cents with bone. The hide, if it was in good shape with no holes, might fetch 7 or 8 yuan. Auntie Lu, the loud one, was already doing math on her fingers. That wolf's got to have at least 40-some pounds of meat after skinning and gutting. Plus the hide. That's 30 yuan easy. The men around her nodded, eyes shining with envy. One trip into the mountains, and he makes more than we earn breaking our backs for half a year, after paying the grain tax and selling what little was left to the purchasing station. A farming family barely had anything to show for a year's labor. Then old Zhang stepped forward, thumping his chest. Dongha, how about this? Next time you go in, take me along. I'll carry your gear, haul the kills, whatever you need. I won't slow you down. When we get back, just toss me some scraps. Even a set of organs would do. Let my kids taste something besides porridge. A few other men shifted on their feet, clearly thinking the same thing. Everyone's intentions were written all over their faces. They wanted in on the hunting. But hunting is a lone wolf's trade. More people means more noise, more risk, more complications. Still, I couldn't afford to offend anyone outright. My parents needed these neighbors. So I put on a grim face and told them what the mountains were really like. I described being surrounded by a wolf pack, a dozen pairs of glowing green eyes, howling beneath my tree. I told them about wolf kings that don't charge, they just wait. They circle below while you freeze, starve, and eventually fall. I let them imagine the rest. The enthusiasm drained from every face. Auntie Lu got goosebumps. The men who'd been ready to volunteer went quiet. Earning money was one thing. Gambling your life was another. Auntie Lu redirected her energy into cursing Li Ergu and Li Hongmei, calling her a viper for betraying me after I'd helped her. Other villagers chimed in, admitting that while I'd always been hot-tempered and quick with my fists, I'd never bullied anyone in our village. Whenever local kids got picked on by outsiders, I was the one who went to back them up. Compared to Li family village's shameless extortion, I was practically a saint. Then a clear, young voice came from the back of the crowd. Dongha, you're amazing. Are you going to the county tomorrow? Can I come along? Li Shui squeezed through the gate, cheeks red from the cold, eyes sparkling. She said she wanted to buy some things in town. Auntie Lu pounced on that immediately, drawing out her words with a sly grin. Oh, little Shui, you don't want to go shopping. You just want more time with your Dongha. Should Auntie play matchmaker? Another woman laughed and agreed that Li Shui was the only girl fierce enough to keep me in line. Li Shui's face turned crimson. Before she could stammer out a denial, my mother grabbed her hand warmly. Shui, Auntie's watched you grow up. I know my boy was a handful before, but I promise, if he ever gives you trouble, I'll skin him myself before you even have to ask. Li Shui stood there, face burning, twisting the hem of her coat, unable to get a single word out under all those smiling eyes. My father coughed pointedly from his corner and drilled me with a look that could have set fire to wet wood. The message was unmistakable. What are you waiting for, you idiot? Both my parents had seen Li Shui's feelings plain as day in all the small kindnesses she'd shown me. They knew my reputation meant no decent family would willingly send their daughter my way. This was a gift from heaven, and they weren't about to let me fumble it. I shot to my feet, crossed the yard in 3 steps, and said it loud and clear so everyone could hear. Shui, I like you too. Will you be my girl? If you're willing, just nod. The whole yard went silent. Under all those watching eyes, Li Shui's neck flushed pink. She gave the tiniest nod, barely a flutter, then turned and bolted out the gate like a startled deer. The village's fiercest girl, undone by her first love confession in public. The yard erupted in laughter. The aunties were in heaven. Teasing young couples was their favorite winter sport. My mother beamed, so wide her eyes nearly disappeared. That was settled. The next morning before dawn, I borrowed the village chief's prized bicycle and rode to Li Shui's door. She opened it with sleepy eyes that lit up when she saw me. I told her to hop on. We were going to the county. But she hesitated, twisting her coat hem again. You go ahead. We'll go together next time. I was confused. She'd been eager yesterday. She glanced around to make sure no one was watching, stood on her tiptoes, and planted a quick, cold, soft kiss on my cheek. Then she slammed the door shut. Through the wood came her muffled voice. I don't want the aunties gossiping. Next time, I stood there grinning like a fool, heart on fire from that feather-light touch. Next time I catch this girl, I'm kissing her back properly. I strapped the heavy burlap sack with the processed wolf onto the bicycle frame, keeping up appearances for my parents and anyone who might be watching. Once I was well clear of the village with nobody in sight, I touched the sack and swept it into my storage space. No point hauling dead weight for 30-some li to the county. Half an hour of hard pedaling later, I rolled into town. I didn't go to the supply cooperative or the government purchasing station. Their prices were too low, and the co-op wouldn't take meat without the meat processing plant stamp. Instead, I turned down a quiet alley and stopped at a private house with high brick walls and a red-painted gate. I checked that nobody was watching, pulled the heavy sack back out of storage, and knocked. The door cracked open, and a sharp-eyed man in his 50s looked me over. This was Kuei, a black market dealer who'd become a legitimate businessman, and in my previous life, a trusted friend and partner. We wouldn't have met for another 8 years in the original timeline, but I knew exactly where to find him now. I told him I had fresh mountain goods and was looking for a reliable buyer. If his prices were fair, he'd be my only dealer going forward. That got his attention fast. He let me in and made his pitch. He could handle anything, buy anything, and if I ever ran into trouble, he could fix that too. For a price, of course. When I opened the sack and showed him the cleaned wolf meat, his eyebrows went up. Then I told him the full inventory, 14 wolves and 6 roe deer. His eyes nearly popped out of his head. The small-time poachers he usually dealt with brought in a few rabbits at most. This was a gold mine for him. If he could offer rare wild game that nobody else had, in consistent supply, his reputation would be set. He dropped the haggling act and gave me straight prices. 10 yuan per wolf hide. 6 cents per pound for wolf meat with bone. Roe deer sold whole. 80 yuan for a buck, 75 for a doe, hide included. He knew I might pull the valuable deer parts off separately if he didn't price them in. I accepted. We headed out to a small grove outside town where I'd told him the goods were stashed. He brought a dozen men and 2 ox carts. When we got close, I told him my partners were shy about being seen. Too much money draws trouble. He understood immediately. I went into the trees alone, and once I was out of sight, pulled everything from my storage space. 14 wolves and 6 roe deer appeared on the frozen ground, fresh as the moment they died. Blood still wet, meat perfectly preserved. Kuei's men gasped when they saw the pile. The deer wounds were still dripping blood, which seemed impossible given the time that had passed. Kuei reacted fastest. He slapped his thigh and yelled at his men to get the water skins ready to catch the deer blood, which was a valuable tonic worth good money to the right buyer. Now he understood why I'd told him to bring containers. He squeezed the wolf meat, sniffed the deer wounds, pinched the muscle for freshness. This is better than just slaughtered, he said, genuinely impressed. Then he threw out a better offer than we'd agreed on. Instead of weighing each wolf separately, he'd pay a flat 40 yuan per wolf regardless of size, clearly in my favor. He wanted to lock me in as his supplier. He did the math out loud. 14 wolves at 40 was 560. One buck at 80 plus 5 does at 75 was 455. Grand total, 1,015 yuan. He pulled a thick cloth bundle from inside his coat and counted out the bills. Crisp 10 yuan notes flicked through his fingers. He handed me a fat stack. Over 1,000 yuan. More money than most families around here saw in years. One day's work. 1,000 yuan. I counted the money right in front of Kuei. 1,015 yuan, every bill accounted for. Even with 2 lifetimes of experience, my heart pounded holding that much cash. This was my first real fortune in this era, and the endless mountains of the Northeast were an open vault for someone with my abilities. I slipped the money into my storage space when he wasn't looking, then noticed the weapons his men were carrying. I couldn't keep borrowing the village's old rifle forever. People would talk. Kuei, one more thing. I'd like to buy one of those Mosin-Nagant rifles your men have, plus some ammunition. I'm planning to hit a bear den in a few days. His eyes lit up instantly. Bear gallbladders were worth a fortune, the kind of thing rich city people would pay top price for and still struggle to find. He thought for barely a second before making me an offer I didn't expect. The rifle is free. Call it a deposit from your big brother. You bring me that bear gallbladder, and we'll settle up then. Even a grass gallbladder, I'll take it. If you find a copper gallbladder, I'll pay extra. Bear kneecaps too. City folks with bad joints will fight over those. A Mosin-Nagant cost 1,000 yuan new at the supply store. He was handing me one for nothing, gambling that I'd keep bringing him goods. When I pointed out we'd just met, and he didn't even know where I lived, he laughed. Kid, when you took 1,000 yuan just now, your hand barely shook. Your eyes didn't even blink. That's not a first-timer's reaction. And this meat, blood still wet, fresh as a live kill. Hauling 14 wolves back like that takes at least 20 men. A single rifle means nothing to someone like you. And if you do bag a bear, nobody in this county will pay you better than me. Same sharp instincts as in my previous life. I told him he had a deal. Everything I killed would come to him first, still warm. He ordered his men to hand over half their ammunition, at least 150 rounds, and personally gave me the rifle. I thanked everyone and rode off toward town. At the county supply store, I went on a shopping spree. A new enamel wash basin, a red thermos, bolts of rough cloth, an iron pot, aluminum basins, bottles of oil, salt, soy sauce, and vinegar, everything a household needed. Over 100 yuan spent, which would have seemed insane to anyone watching. The shop clerks whispered among themselves, eyeing this plainly dressed young man buying like a rich man. In a quiet alley, I swept everything into my storage space. Then I bought a few dozen steamed buns to quiet my screaming stomach and headed to the grain station. Rice, 18 cents a pound. White flour, 19 cents. Cornmeal, 15, the clerk rattled off. I bought 100 pounds of rice and 100 pounds of white flour. No cornmeal. My parents had suffered too long on coarse grain. They deserved real food. I knew if I brought cornmeal home, they'd insist on eating that and saving the good stuff for me. I wanted to buy even more, but figured I'd be scolded for being wasteful. I stored the grain in my space too. No point hauling it through the village in broad daylight and making everyone stare. As I approached the village, something felt wrong. The threshing yard at the entrance was empty. On a sunny winter day, it should have been packed with women doing needlework and gossiping. Dead quiet instead. Then I heard it. From the direction of my house. Shouting, a whole crowd's worth. One voice rose above the rest, arrogant and loud. Chun Dashin, cut the sob story. I didn't come to hear you cry. Debt is debt. 300 yuan, right now. The villagers were packed around our fence, every face angry. My heart dropped like a stone. They'd come early. I shoved through the crowd and into the yard. 4 or 5 familiar faces stood there. The one in front, wearing a tacky green floral shirt with his hair slicked into a perfect center part, that was Li Ergu. Li Ergu was standing in my yard with his hands in his pockets, spitting insults at my father. He'd kicked over a bench and was waving a hospital paper around, some fake concussion diagnosis stamped with an official seal. His lackeys backed him up, one claiming they'd acted in self-defense, another threatening to report me to the security office if we didn't pay. Then Li Ergu went too far. He told my father to get on his knees, kowtow 3 times, and beg, and maybe he'd come back tomorrow for the money instead. Otherwise, he'd file charges and brand me a criminal for life. My father was shaking from head to toe. I could see it in his eyes. He was actually considering it. He'd endure any humiliation to protect his son. The village crowd exploded with rage, cursing Li Ergu, calling out the whole scheme, damning Li Hongmei for betraying me after I'd saved her. But Li Ergu just spat on the ground and told everyone to shut up. Kneel? Or I go to the authorities right now. Kneel to your mother's leg, I roared. I came through that gate like a wild animal. Before Li Ergu could blink, my boot slammed into his stomach. He flew back 2 meters, crashed onto the ground, and vomited up everything he'd eaten. While he was still curled up groaning, I pulled out my woodcutting knife. The blade caught the winter sunlight. My eyes were red, every drop of rage from 2 lifetimes boiling over. I raised the knife high and swung it down at his skull. Help! He's going to kill me, Li Ergu screamed, scrambling backward like a worm. My father got to me first. He threw his whole body around my waist, clinging on with everything he had. Are you insane? Put the knife down. He's not worth it. I couldn't shake him off without hurting him. The fury inside me was a volcano. I cursed Li Ergu and every one of his ancestors, telling him I'd chop him up and feed him to the dogs. The killing intent pouring off me, the kind you only get from crawling through piles of corpses, hit everyone in that yard like a blast of cold air. Li Ergu's thugs went pale and stumbled backward, all their swagger gone in an instant. Li Ergu collapsed against the wall, crying, snot running down his face. Don't kill me. Brother Donga. Grandpa Donga. I don't want the money. Keep it. Please spare my worthless life. Even with my father hanging on me, I dragged him forward a step. I stomped down on Li Ergu's ankle and swung the knife again. The blade whistled past his face, close enough to open a thin red line across the tip of his nose. His back hit the wall. A dark stain spread across his crotch and a stench of urine filled the air. My father screamed at me with everything he had. If you kill him, I'll go drown myself in the reservoir. I'd rather die first than watch them take you away. My knuckles went white on the knife handle. The yard was dead silent except for Li Ergu's shaking, rattling breaths, and the smell of piss. In that moment, I could see it in his eyes. Li Ergu finally understood. His own father had once told him never to push a man too far. He'd come here to humiliate us, to grind my father's face into the dirt for sport, when all he had to do was take the money and leave. Now he knew the truth. I would absolutely have killed him. That blade missed his skull by inches, and it wasn't an accident. It was my father's weight that saved his life. I sucked in a long breath and drove my gaze into his bloodless face like a nail. Li Ergu, if you want to live, you're going to tell the truth about what happened that day. Every single detail. Get one word wrong, and I'll skin you alive. Li Ergu's courage was already shattered. That knife swing had broken him completely. He confessed everything right there in the dirt. He admitted he'd been trying to assault Li Hongmei in the cornfield when I caught him. I was going to drag him to the security office, and for what he'd done, he would have been executed. So his buddy Goshing smashed me in the head with a shovel, nearly killed me. Then they faked the injury report and flipped the story to frame me as the attacker. I went inside, grabbed paper and a pen, and threw them in his face. Write it all down. My father was so furious he could barely speak. Write the confession or die. Pick one. Li Ergu's hands shook so badly his writing came out crooked, smeared with tears and snot. He didn't dare leave out a single detail. When he finished, I flicked my knife across his fingertip, drawing blood. He screamed, thinking I was going to cut his throat. Press your thumbprint, I said coldly. He stamped the paper with a bloody fingerprint. Now write a second document. 500 yuan in compensation for emotional damages. You have 3 days to deliver every cent. If you don't, this confession goes straight to the county security office. Attempted assault, false accusation, extortion, blackmail. How many of those charges earn a bullet? And Li Hongmei and your little gang are going down with you. His face went gray. Even if he claimed the confession was forced, the moment investigators questioned Li Hongmei and the others, they'd crack and sell him out. He knew it. I'll get the money. 3 days, I promise. One more thing, I said. Kneel. Kowtow to my father and apologize. He dropped to his knees without a second's hesitation and banged his forehead on the frozen ground 3 times. Then he scrambled up and ran out of the village like the devil was chasing him, his thugs scurrying after him. The villagers erupted in cheers. People slapped my back and shouted that I'd handled it perfectly. Getting a signed confession with a blood thumbprint in front of dozens of witnesses left Li Ergu no room to wriggle out of anything. I thanked everyone and promised that next time I brought back a big haul from the mountains, the whole village would get a share. After the crowd thinned out, I grinned at my father. "So, Pa, how was my acting? Pretty convincing, right?" That coward literally wet himself. My father glared at me, then burst out laughing, tears still drying on his face. "You little bastard, you nearly gave your old man a heart attack." He was relieved. The old version of me would have genuinely lost control and killed someone. Seeing me channel that rage into something smart meant I'd finally grown up. Then I looked around the empty yard. "Pa, where's Ma? And second sister? Xiaoya? Li Shui?" He puffed his pipe and told me they'd all gone together to the second ridge, a sheltered, south-facing valley near the village, to dig for wild vegetables. The only place that still had green shoots in this cold. Second ridge. The words hit me like a hammer. A memory from my previous life crashed through. This winter, a bear had denayed somewhere in that valley. A woman from the neighboring village had gone there to dig roots, and the bear dragged her into its cave. By the time people found her, there was almost nothing left. My hands started shaking. I dropped everything and sprinted out of the yard toward Second Ridge. My father shouted after me, confused, but I was already gone. I ran as fast as my legs could carry me, lungs burning. When I reached the valley entrance and looked in, the front section was empty. The bear's den was deeper in, near the sunny rock face at the far end, exactly where the attack had happened in my past life. I pulled the Mosin Nagant from my storage space and kept running. When I rounded the big rock that blocked the view of the inner valley, my blood turned to ice. A massive black bear, over 2 meters tall standing on its hind legs, was lumbering toward my family. My mother was frozen white as paper, legs shaking so badly she couldn't move or scream. Behind her, my second sister was clutching Xiaoya against the rock wall, both paralyzed with terror. Li Shui stood beside them, face drained of all color. The bear's breath came out in clouds of steam. Each heavy step shook the ground. Its low growl made the air itself feel solid. I was gasping so hard from the run that I couldn't hold the rifle steady, and at 700 or 800 meters, I was terrified of missing and hitting one of them instead. So I pointed the barrel at the sky and pulled the trigger. The gunshot ripped through the valley like thunder. The bear froze, then swung its massive head toward me. Its eyes locked on mine, pure rage. It dropped to all fours and charged. I kept my nerve as the bear charged. My lungs were burning so badly from the sprint that I couldn't hold the rifle steady, so I had to let it get closer. At about 50 meters, I held my breath, lined up the sights, and fired. The bullet hit the bear square in its white chest patch. Blood sprayed out, but all it did was make the beast angrier. Its small eyes turned red, and it came even faster. I barely had time to work the bolt before it was on top of me. 2 massive paws rose up like dinner plates, claws ready to split my skull like a watermelon. In that frozen instant, death was close enough to smell. Survival instinct took over. I jammed the rifle muzzle up under the bear's jaw and pulled the trigger. The shot was deafening at point-blank range. The bullet punched up through its skull and blew out the back of its head, spraying hot blood and bone all over my face. I threw the rifle aside and tried to roll clear. But the sprint had drained me too badly. I was a half-second too slow. The bear's paw grazed my forehead as it came down, raking a burning line across my skin. Then 400 pounds of dead bear crashed on top of me and pinned me to the frozen ground. I lay there crushed, barely able to breathe, hot bear blood mixing with cold snow soaking through my clothes. If this had been a brown bear, over 1,300 pounds, those 2 bullets might not have even killed it. I was lucky this was a black bear. My mother's scream reached me first. Then I heard all of them running. My mother, Li Shui, my second sister, little Xiaoya crying and stumbling behind on her short legs. The whole fight had lasted maybe 5 seconds from first shot to the bear landing on me. They'd been over 100 meters away, and even sprinting through deep snow, it took them more than 10 seconds to reach me. When they got close, they froze. The bear lay motionless on its side, half its skull missing, brains leaking out. Only my arm was visible beneath the carcass. My muffled voice came out from under it. "Ma, help me push this thing off." "I can't move," Li Shui reacted fastest. The 3 women, my mother, my sister, and Li Shui, turned red in the face straining before they managed to roll the still warm body off me. My mother nearly fainted when she saw me covered head to toe in blood. Son, don't you scare me. How bad is it? I sucked in several deep breaths of bloody, freezing air, forced myself to sit up, wiped my face, and tried to smile, with blood all over my teeth and lips. I'm sure the smile was more terrifying than reassuring. Ma, I'm fine. The second shot went through its jaw, and the blood sprayed on me. That's all. I could have dodged completely if I hadn't used up all my energy running here. It just fell on me. I stood up, wobbling, and swung my arm to prove I was in one piece. Li Shui spotted the bleeding scrape on my forehead right away. Her fingers trembled as she dabbed at the blood with her handkerchief. You call this fine? Your forehead's cut open. It stung like fire, but compared to what could have happened, it was nothing. I told her and my second sister to head back to the village and bring my father, my second uncle, and my cousin Yuan Chao. I'd stay here and butcher the bear. I didn't want the whole village finding out about this. Wealth shouldn't be flaunted. Li Shui checked me over first, feeling my arms for breaks and patting me down to make sure nothing was damaged inside. Only when she was satisfied did she let herself cry, pressing her handkerchief against my forehead one last time. Be careful here by yourself. She grabbed Xiaoyu, scooped up sobbing little Xiaoya, and ran for the village. My mother refused to leave. Her legs could barely hold her. She leaned against a tree, still white as a sheet. I reassured her until she calmed down, then pulled out my hunting knife and got to work. What she saw next must have looked like magic. The blade moved through the bear's thick hide like it had a mind of its own, slicing between fur and fat with a soft hissing sound. In less than a minute, the entire skin peeled off in one piece, like pulling off a coat. Let me handle the messy part, my mother said, taking the heavy hide and scrubbing the blood off with handfuls of clean snow. She was still shaking, but I could see the calculation already turning in her head. Hide, meat, fat, oil. With this bear, we'd have food and supplies for the whole winter. Her son wouldn't go hungry anymore. To a mother, her son always comes first. Daughters would marry and leave someday. But a son, that was her whole world and her only hope. I understood my mother perfectly. This woman had spent her whole life living for her son. When I smiled, her wrinkles softened. When I frowned, her heart clenched. That kind of love wasn't a burden. It was pure warmth, enough to make even this bitter cold feel bearable. I worked the knife with care, finding every joint and seam in the frozen carcass. When I opened the belly, I checked where my first bullet had gone. It hit the chest, but missed the heart, shattering some tissue nearby. Following the old hunter's custom, I hung the damaged organs on a low branch as an offering to the mountain spirit. I couldn't explain exactly where the tradition came from, but it felt right. A man should have respect for the things he takes. Then, deep in the abdominal cavity, my fingers found something that made my pulse jump. A gallbladder, golden and solid as amber. Copper gallbladder, my mother gasped, her voice shaking with excitement. She was right. Last year, someone in the neighboring village had pulled a copper gallbladder from a bear and sold it for 1,000 yuan, and buyers were still lining up with money in hand, unable to find one. Add in the bear's kneecaps, a legendary folk remedy for bad joints, and the thick layer of white fat that could be rendered into oil. Bear oil kept biscuits soft even at 40 below zero, and it was perfect for lubricating gun parts in extreme cold to prevent jamming. My mother smiled for the first time since the ordeal. But then her eyes fell on the scrape across my forehead and my trembling legs, and the smile faded. Son, I'm begging you, she said, voice dropping low. Can you stop going into the mountains? If something like today happened again and you didn't come back, how would I live the rest of my life? Tears rolled down her lined cheeks onto the snow. I softened my voice and explained as gently as I could. Hunting wasn't as dangerous as today made it look. This was a freak situation. I'd sprinted myself half to death and stumbled into a startled bear fresh from its den. Normally, hunters had proper methods for dealing with bear dens. Traps, stakeouts, careful preparation. The truly deadly threat would be a tiger, but tigers hadn't been seen in this part of the mountains for years. And experienced hunters could read the forest. When the rabbits and pheasants disappeared from an area, it meant something big had moved in. I told her that was exactly how I'd known something was wrong with Second Ridge. I'd come here days ago to set rabbit snares and found nothing, not a single track. That meant a large predator had claimed the territory. When my father mentioned she'd taken everyone here to dig wild vegetables, I'd panicked and come running. She wiped her eyes and nodded, still shaken. Who would have believed there was a bear den at Second Ridge? People would think we were making it up. I grinned, wincing when it pulled the cut on my forehead. That's exactly what we want. Nobody believes it. Nobody comes snooping. We keep this quiet, bring everything home behind closed doors. If the village smells meat cooking, we say I killed a wolf. Tomorrow I'll go out again and try to get some wolf or deer meat to share around. We owe that much since I'm using the village's rifle, my mother agreed. 400 pounds of bear meat, eaten quietly by our family, would last through the entire winter into spring. Bear meat ran warm and rich, perfect for building back the strength we'd all lost from months of near starvation. We were still talking when voices echoed from the trail. My second uncle Chin Erzhan came charging through the snow first, panting hard. Li Shui had run to his house in a panic, only managing to say I was in trouble before dragging him out. Right behind him was his son, my cousin Chin Yuan Chao, a wiry, dark-skinned kid 2 years younger than me, fearless and sharp-eyed. He was the village daredevil, afraid of nothing, and the only person who could keep him in line was me. When I saw Yuan Chao's face, my eyes stung. In my previous life, this kid, my brother in everything but blood, the one I'd grown up wrestling and exploring with, had disappeared in these mountains and was never found. That was a wound that never healed. This time, I'd protect him no matter what. They stopped dead when they saw the scene. The butchered bear laid out in pieces, the huge black hides spread on the snow, me standing there caked in blood but alive. My second uncle's jaw dropped, so wide you could have fit an egg in it. Good Lord, Dongha, you actually took down this monster? If I wasn't staring at the meat right now, I wouldn't believe it if you beat me to death. Yuan Chao let out a whoop and slammed into me with a bear hug, not caring about the blood all over my clothes. His face was flushed red with excitement. Third brother, you're incredible. A bear. You just killed a bear. When word gets out, every single person in this village is going to bow down to you. I glared at Yuan Chao. Keep your mouth shut. You want the whole county knowing? Don't you understand that showing off wealth only brings trouble? I told him to take a share of the meat to third uncle's family since third uncle was away driving. He pouted about not being able to brag, but his father smacked him on the back of the head, and that settled it. My father divided up the work and reminded everyone to move quietly. It was getting late, and we needed to be back before anyone spotted us. He told second uncle to take extra meat since our grandparents were living at his house. Second uncle puffed up immediately. They're my parents too. Don't insult me by acting like it's charity. I noticed Li Shui hadn't come back with them. My second sister said she'd stayed behind to look after her mother and figured we had enough hands. But I knew the real reason. She didn't want to put herself in a position where I'd feel obligated to give her a share. She was too proud to take advantage. A girl like that was a treasure, and I made a mental note to bring her a nice cut of meat tonight. Maybe 10 pounds of that marbled bear meat. We made it home after dark. The village was dead quiet. Electricity had been run into the village last year, but power was rationed. The city got priority at night, so we were back to kerosene lamps and candles after sundown. My father grabbed the water bucket before I could and went to the well himself. His bad leg didn't stop him from carrying heavy loads. He could still haul plenty. I didn't argue. He needed to feel useful. I cut a 5-pound piece of marbled bear haunch, washed it carefully, and started cooking. I secretly pulled out some spices from my storage space: cinnamon, star anise, Sichuan peppercorn, ginger, and a small piece of precious rock sugar. The meat went into the big pot with cold water to blanch first, then into a fresh pot to stew slowly over the wood fire. I told my mother I needed to go out to retrieve the supplies I'd bought in the county. I used the excuse that I'd hidden everything outside when Liurga showed up, in case there was more trouble. Out at the edge of the village, I ducked into the trees and pulled a 100-pound sack of rice from my storage space, along with a net bag full of bottled seasonings and cooking supplies. I wanted to bring the hot meat buns I'd bought too, but they came out of storage still steaming. Impossible to explain, so I put them back. When my mother saw the bag of white rice, her eyes went wide with distress. Why'd you buy rice? It's expensive and doesn't fill you up. Cornmeal would have been so much cheaper. I leaned close and whispered the numbers. I told her I'd sold 6 wolves at 35 yuan each and 4 roe deer, bucks at 80, does at 75, to a dealer named Kuei in the county. I deliberately understated the haul. If they knew I'd actually killed 14 wolves and attracted a whole pack with an alpha, they'd chain me to the house, and never let me near the mountains again. Mountain people knew that a pack over 10 strong meant a cunning alpha, the kind of threat that even tigers avoided. My mother's face didn't brighten at the money. Instead, her worry deepened. We have some money now. Can't you just stop going into the mountains? It's too dangerous. My father set down his pipe and stared at me with the same silent disapproval. My second sister chimed in, still shaken from the bear encounter. The mountain is terrifying. If you hadn't shown up today like some kind of god and shot that bear, it would have torn us all apart. Think about the old hunters in the village. Every single one of them is covered in scars. Then little Xiaoya piped up in her tiny voice, nodding her head solemnly the way she'd seen grown-ups do. Brother, I won't ask for meat anymore. Just please don't go into the mountains, okay? Their eyes were all on me, warm, worried, pleading. My heart felt like it was burning. But stop going into the mountains? That was impossible. My hunting system was made for those mountains. Sitting on this gift and not using it. How would I give my family a good life? How would I let my parents grow old in comfort? How would I make sure Xiaoya grew up safe and happy? How would I marry Li Shui with the dignity she deserved? Relax, all of you, I told my family, keeping my voice easy and confident. I won't go into the deep forest. I'll stick to the edges, pick off some pheasants and rabbits. Besides, hunting isn't about charging in like a madman. It's about brains and skill. My father squinted at me through his pipe smoke. Since when do you know how to hunt? Who taught you? I had my story ready. I told them about old Zhang, the legendary hunter in Stone Village. A war veteran who'd fought the Japanese and the Americans, came home wounded, and became the most skilled hunter in the region. He'd even killed a tiger. As a kid, I used to sneak over to his place all the time, pestering him for stories about war and hunting. Everyone thought I was just goofing off, but he'd actually taught me real skills, tracking animals, setting traps, reading wind and scent, moving through forest without making a sound. My second sister backed me up without knowing it. People in Stone Village said old Zhang mentioned you before he passed, said you had guts but were wild as a monkey. I ran with it. The old man had decades in those mountains and never once got seriously hurt, while other hunters were constantly coming home injured. He always said a real hunter treats the forest with total respect, stays alert every second, and becomes part of the woods itself. Any beast, no matter how fierce, could be outsmarted by a patient hunter who understood its habits. The worry on their faces gradually faded. I changed the subject as the smell of stewing bear meat filled the house. My second sister got the hint and started steaming a pot of that white rice I'd bought. Xiaoya had already forgotten her solemn promise about not wanting meat. She was perched on a little stool by the kitchen door, nose twitching, practically drooling. Watching her like that, so innocent and happy, my heart went soft. This simple moment was the kind of treasure I'd never managed to touch in my entire previous life. I wanted to bring meat to Li Shui's house that evening, but when I walked over, the place was pitch dark. No lamp, no candlelight. Mother and daughter had gone to bed early. It would have to wait until morning. Dinner was a feast beyond anything this family had known. Soft, falling apart bear meat soaked in rich broth, starchy potatoes that had absorbed all the flavor, and steaming bowls of white rice. When I poured the thick meat gravy over that glistening rice, I almost wanted to swallow my own tongue. I inhaled 2 huge bowls and felt truly, deeply full for the first time in this life. That night, I lay on the warm brick bed and fell asleep the instant my head hit the pillow. No dreams. I woke before dawn, as always. First thing, I checked my storage space. Flour, cloth, the precious bear kneecaps, and the copper gallbladder sitting there perfectly preserved in frozen time. Today's mission, ride to the county and sell the gallbladder to Kuei. I wasn't selling the bear meat. That was too valuable as food for rebuilding my family's health. I pushed the bicycle out quietly, not waking anyone, and pedaled through the bone-cold pre-dawn darkness. When I knocked on Kuei's gate, the sky was barely gray. He opened the door in a thick cotton coat, bleary-eyed, but the second he saw me, sleep vanished from his face and was replaced by excitement. Brother, it's barely light out. What's the rush? I grinned through my frozen cheeks. Didn't rest yesterday afternoon, went into the mountain. Got lucky. Brought you something special and didn't want to wait. I'd already pulled the gallbladder and 2 oil paper-wrapped bear kneecaps from my storage space before knocking. Kuei's eyes went wide. Yesterday, he'd heard me mention hitting a bear den and probably figured it was just big talk. something to think about down the road. Now here I was, less than a day later, with the goods in hand. Incredible. Absolutely incredible. He couldn't stop saying it, genuine admiration in his voice. Get inside. Warm up. It's freezing out here. He ushered me into the main room, poured scalding tea, and could barely contain himself as his eyes locked onto my basket. Have a look, I said, and carefully set the oil paper bundle on his clean table. Kuei unwrapped the oil paper with careful hands. The copper gallbladder sat there glowing golden, smooth as jade, plump and full. His eyes lit up like lanterns. Copper gallbladder. This big, this full. This is top-grade goods you can't find even with money. He held up one finger. Market price is around 1,000. But you've been straight with me, so I'll give you 1,100. Drug dealers out there would lowball you hard. They'd never match this. I nodded. Fair price. He unwrapped the 2 bare kneecaps next. Clean, polished bone with a nice sheen. He said good ones like these had been scarce for years, and with the economy opening up, wealthy city people would pay well. But he needed time to find the right buyer. I told him to keep them and sell when he found the right person. Whatever they fetched was fine. I trusted him completely. That made his day. He was already seeing returns on the rifle he'd practically given me yesterday. He thumped his chest and promised he wouldn't let me down. He went into the back room and came out with a stack of crisp bills. The rifle was used goods, so I'll dock 500 for that. The remaining 600 for the gallbladder, every cent accounted for. As for the kneecaps, whatever I sell them for goes straight to you. Not a penny of middleman profit. Just keep me in mind when you get more good stuff. I handed him a sack with about 15 pounds of marbled bear meat as a gift. Told him next time I found a bear den, I'd bring him the whole animal. He laughed and accepted without pretense. Riding home with 600 yuan in my pocket, I did the math. This money should go to my mother. Let her hold it so she'd finally stop worrying and pinching every single coin. In our little mountain village, a bride price was only a few dozen yuan. The fancy, 3 spinning things and a radio that city folks expected at weddings. That was a different world entirely. Out here, bags of grain in the storehouse meant more than cash. I stopped and set aside 50 yuan for myself to cover what I'd already spent at the supply store: fabric, flour, sugar, seasonings. Then I rode into town. At the supply store, I bought 2 pounds of white rabbit milk candies and 3 pounds of fruit hard candies. Xiaya would go crazy for them, and second uncle's 2 little girls, Lingzi and Fong Fong, deserved treats too. As for my cousin Yuan Xiao, his mother could decide whether he'd earned any. Passing a steam bun stall, I caught the scent of fresh meat buns just coming out of the steamer. I bought 30 big ones. In the mountains, building a fire to cook attracted predators and wasted precious hunting time. Hot buns stored in my space would stay steaming forever, perfect trail food. Hunting burned enormous energy, and in the deep forest, stamina meant survival. I got home before most villagers were even awake. My parents were already up, making thin porridge and reheating leftover corn cakes for breakfast. During the idle winter months, families ate only 2 meals a day to save grain. One around 9 in the morning, another around 4 or 5 in the afternoon. Before entering the village, I'd pulled everything from my storage space and loaded it onto the bicycle where people could see it. All the new household goods I'd bought yesterday. Villagers spotted the haul, and their eyes went wide with envy. Everyone knew what had happened with Li Ergu, that I didn't know the 300 anymore, but they also knew those thugs had stripped our house clean. Buying new supplies was just common sense. Old Zhang caught me at the village entrance, craning his neck at the bags. Dongha, don't tell me you spent all the wolf money on this stuff. I played it up with a sigh. What choice did I have? That bastardly Erga didn't leave us a single onion stalk behind the kitchen door. Pots, bowls, bedding, cooking oil. Everything had to be replaced from scratch. How else are my parents supposed to survive the winter? The old man spat on the ground in disgust. Should have given that dog a worse beating yesterday. Getting off so easy was too good for him. The other old-timers sunning themselves by the south wall all nodded in agreement. I wheeled everything into our yard and had just finished unloading when my mother came out of the house. My mother saw the pile of new supplies and immediately started scolding me for spending too much. We're farm people. Cornmeal is good enough. Why are you buying fine white flour like some city family? I set everything down and told her gently that she and my father had worked hard their whole lives raising us kids. From now on, things would be different. We'd eat proper food, not just fine grain, but regular meat and vegetables too. Then I brought up my eldest sister. I wanted to visit her soon and bring supplies. My mother's face crumpled with worry. Big sister had married a kind but poor man, and then his parents both died, leaving 2 younger brothers and 3 unmarried sisters for them to raise. The 2 of them hadn't even dared have children of their own. Every scrap of food went to feeding that huge household. When our family got into trouble, Big sister and her husband had somehow scraped together over 50 yuan to send us, all borrowed money. Her husband had said not to worry about paying it back, that he'd handle it. That kind of loyalty you don't forget. My mother wiped her eyes. Take a big piece of that bear meat and the tin of malted milk powder to your sister. Last time I saw her, she was nothing but skin and bones. I told her the malted milk was for her and my father. I'd buy new for big sister. Then I pulled out the remaining 550 yuan and pressed the whole stack into her hands. Her eyes went wide. I explained I'd sold the bear for 1,100 total, but spent 500 on a proper rifle of my own, a Mosin-Nagant with 100 rounds of ammunition. I couldn't keep borrowing the village's gun forever. People would talk. My father had been quiet, but his eyes locked onto that rifle the moment I set it on the table. He picked it up, worked the bolt, sighted down the barrel, and finally gave a satisfied nod. Money well spent. Good gun. My mother clutched the money, torn between pride and anxiety. A gun that costs as much as half a wedding. All this money, earned by risking your life on that mountain. But her fingers squeezed the bills tighter even as she complained. I turned to more important things. I told my parents to save the money and not rush my second sister's marriage. Let her pick someone she actually liked with good character. And Xiaoya absolutely had to start school next spring. She was nearly 9 years old already. My father gave one firm nod before my mother could object. She tried anyway. What does a girl need school for? A few characters is plenty, but one look from me silenced her. She muttered about tuition costing dozens of yuan earned through life-threatening hunting, but let it go. I noticed my second sister's eyes drop when schooling came up. She'd wanted to study more too, back when the family couldn't afford it. A flicker of old sadness crossed her face. I leaned over and whispered to her with a teasing grin. So, second sister, I hear you've got someone on your mind. Which family's boy is it? She jerked up like I'd burned her, face flaming red. What nonsense. I knew exactly who it was. In my previous life, after terrible things happened to our family, a quiet, stone-faced young man had nearly killed someone over her. He was the one she loved, currently serving in the army, from Liu Family Hollow. I'd spotted them by the river one evening. The one from Liu Family Hollow? He's still in the military, right? I whispered. Don't worry, I won't tell Ma and Pa. When you're ready, you tell them yourself. I already laid the groundwork. Told them not to rush your marriage. Get out of here. She shoved me away, mortified, twisting her coat hem in her fingers. My parents couldn't hear what we were whispering, but seeing her blush and me grinning told them enough. They looked content. With the family back on its feet, second sister's marriage could be thought through properly. Little Xiaoya, meanwhile, had eyes only for the candy on the table. The 2 white rabbit milk candies I'd given her earlier were the sweetest thing she'd ever tasted in her life. She was carefully licking the last traces of sweetness from the wrapper. I peeled 2 more and handed them over. No more after these. Too much candy and little bugs will eat holes in your teeth. After a late morning meal, I grabbed a leg of roe deer meat, slung the Type 38 over my shoulder, and told my parents I was returning the bicycle and the village's rifle. But in my head I was already planning. I knew where a herd of large animals roamed deep in the forest. I'd bring one back to share with the village, fulfill my promise, return the borrowed gun with good grace, and make sure nobody had reason to gossip. Walking through the village, I noticed the change. People greeted me warmly, and the women gossiping by the firewood stacks were saying things I'd never heard before. That Dongha boy has real backbone. Went straight into the mountains to hunt wolves just to pay off that debt. We had him pegged wrong all these years. Hot temper, sure, but he never stole or bullied anyone in this village. Every time our kids got pushed around by outsiders, who stepped up? Him. I let myself smile a little and kept walking toward the forest. Once I was alone, I pulled up my system panel. Level 1, with 35 out of 100 hunts toward the next upgrade. Archery at beginner level, 26 out of 100. Basic knife skill at intermediate, 669 out of 1000. Basic marksmanship at beginner, 12 out of 100. And my 10 by 10 by 10 storage space with time freeze. Only 331 points left to push knife skill to advanced. I decided to finish it today. As I hiked deeper into the wilderness, my knife never stopped moving. Every dead branch, every scraggly twig in my path got chopped. The system chimed with each clean hit. Knife skill +1, knife skill +1, like a metronome marking my steps through the silent forest. After about an hour's trek, the sun was directly overhead. I was heading toward Bullhorn Mountain. In my previous life, I'd learned from Li Hongmei, who'd come to visit me out of guilt, that 2 hunters from Li family village had found a wild boar group in this area just days from now. They'd killed 4 and bragged that the herd had over 20 animals, led by a massive boar weighing over 1,000 pounds, with 7 or 8 sows and a swarm of piglets. Wild boar were a serious menace. Come harvest time, a herd could flatten half an acre of crops in 30 minutes flat. Even the old workpoint system used to reward people for killing them. I intended to find that herd before anyone else did. Then I spotted something, a smudge of gray-brown high in the pine branches that didn't belong to the tree. My heart jumped. A hazel grouse. The locals called them flying dragons. The old saying went, dragon meat in the sky, donkey meat on the ground. These birds were small, barely over a pound each, but they were considered the finest wild game there was. I stashed everything except my knife into storage, pulled out my hunting bow, and nocked an arrow. Hiding behind a birch tree, I tracked the bird as it preened on its branch. One breath held, one clean release. The arrow punched through its thin neck. You always aim for the neck with these birds. Hit the belly, and the meat goes rotten. The body had barely thumped into the snow when 5 or 6 more grouse exploded out of a nearby thicket. 2 of them panicked and flew straight toward me. I got off 2 arrows in rapid succession. First one through the neck, second one caught a bird that practically flew into the arrowhead. The remaining 3 vanished into the dense undergrowth beneath the spruce trees, their mottled brown feathers blending perfectly with the dead leaves. I stared after them, frustrated. If my archery had been at intermediate level, none of them would have escaped. I made a decision right there. Today's goals: push basic knife skill to advanced, and grind archery up to intermediate. The knife needed about 300 more clean strikes on targets, straightforward enough. But archery only counted hits on living things. Practice shots on trees barely registered, just 0.1 points each. I needed to find and hit enough small game to close the gap. At least my arrows were reusable. Better archery would also help when I went after those wild boars at Bullhorn Mountain. Every edge counted. I picked a thick pine and started hacking off straight branches with my knife. If I managed to bag something big today, I'd need a way to haul it down the mountain. A sled would do the trick. In less than half an hour, I'd cut and trimmed the lumber, pulled rope from my storage space, and lashed together a simple but sturdy snow sled. I wiped the sweat off my forehead and checked the system panel. Basic knife skill. Intermediate, 992 out of 1,000. 8 points to go, but I didn't swing right away. I remembered what happened last time. That terrifying wave of hunger after the upgrade nearly killed me in the middle of wolf territory. Out here in the deep forest, I couldn't afford to collapse. I scouted the area carefully, listened for any sounds beyond the wind in the treetops, then backed out to a small clearing where I'd have space and visibility. I took a breath and started swinging. 8 deliberate cuts, each one precise and controlled. The final chime sounded. Basic knife skill upgraded to advanced. My vision went white. A lifetime's worth of memories that weren't mine crashed into my brain. Chopping at wooden stakes in a dirt yard, sharpening blades by lamplight, chasing shadows through forests with a knife in hand. Years of practice compressed into seconds, all focused on one single thing: using a blade. When my eyes opened, the cheap woodcutting knife in my hand felt completely different. It wasn't a tool anymore. It was part of my body, an extension of my will. To test it, I pulled a hazel grouse from my storage space. I didn't even bother switching to the sharper hunting knife. Just a flick of the wrist with the rough woodcutter's blade. 3 sounds, quick as a heartbeat. In 10 seconds flat, the bird was completely disassembled. Feathers in one pile, meat cut into neat portions, organs cleanly removed, skeleton intact and undamaged. Like a legendary butcher carving an ox without ever hitting bone. Then the hunger hit. It was worse than before. A hollow, crushing emptiness that erupted from the core of my body like a tsunami. I felt like a deflated sack. I didn't have time to admire my new skill. I ripped meat buns out of storage and started cramming them in, barely chewing. 6 was normally my limit. I ate 20 in under 3 minutes and was barely at 30% full. The hunger kept clawing at my stomach while I could feel my body transforming from the inside. Every cell screaming for fuel, bones humming, skin burning hot with fine sweat. I kept eating. Every last bun I had, all 58, disappeared down my throat. By the end, I was at maybe 70% full, but the change was undeniable. My body felt like a sleeping beast that had finally woken up, every muscle coiled with new power. I picked up a dry oak leaf from the ground and tossed it into the air. As it spiraled down, I swung the knife in a casual arc. The blade moved so fast it left an afterimage. It didn't even touch the leaf body, just sheared off a thread-thin fiber from the edge. Then my wrist adjusted in micro-movements too fast to see. The leaf danced in the air as if pulled by invisible strings, and a rapid series of whisper-soft cuts split it apart. In the blink of an eye, the whole leaf had dissolved into dozens of hair-thin strands that drifted down to the frozen earth. I stared at those delicate threads on the ground. Even I was stunned. Advanced basic knife skill had taken me to a level I could only call instinct. Chop, slice, shave, turn. Every technique was woven into my muscles, my reflexes, my breathing. It didn't matter what blade I held, woodcutter's knife, butcher's cleaver, combat dagger. They'd all move like part of my arm now. I raised my eyes toward the dark bulk of Bullhorn Mountain and let the grin spread across my face. All right, big boys. Here I come. Let's have some fun. Confidence was one thing, stupidity was another. I wasn't about to charge a herd of wild boars with just a knife. My 2 rifles sat in storage for exactly this kind of situation. The Mosin-Nagant for close-range devastation, the Type 38 for long-range precision. I crept through a ravine choked with fallen trees and waist-deep snow, heading toward Bullhorn Mountain Ridge. I'd expected to spend hours tracking hoof prints and rooting marks. Instead, the moment I reached the ridgeline and peered through the snow-laden fir branches, there they were. A whole herd in a clearing below. The giant boar, the big cannon the hunters had talked about, was lounging against a twisted old pine root, sunbathing. His body was coated in a thick shell of dried mud and pine resin that gleamed like black armor. His curved tusks caught the winter sunlight like pale sickles. Around him, over a dozen sows the size of small boulders, 300 kilos each at least, grazed lazily. A swarm of piglets, maybe 20 or 30 pounds apiece, root-led through the frozen ground with their pink snouts. About 1,000 meters. Too far, and I was stuck on a bare ridgeline with nothing but low scrub for cover. At this distance, I wasn't sure a bullet could punch through that boar's mud and resin armor, and a non-fatal hit on the boss would send the entire herd into a killing frenzy. One charge from that 600 or 700 kilo monster with those tusks would put 2 holes clean through me. I checked the wind, blowing from the ridge down into the valley. Good. Wild boar noses are sharper than dogs. If the wind had been at my back, they'd have smelled me already. I dropped flat and started crawling, inching forward through the snow using only my arms and core, snow sliding off me as I went. After 200 meters of agonizing belly crawling, I was about 800 meters out. That's when the big boar suddenly lifted his massive head. His beady eyes swept the surroundings and locked directly onto my position on the snowy slope. I froze, not daring to breathe. My clothes were caked in snow. I should have been invisible against the white hillside. He grunted, heaved his enormous body upright, shook loose a shower of dried mud, and started trotting toward the ridge. Not panicked, more like a king inspecting his territory. My heart hammered. How had he spotted me? But I forced myself to stay calm and wait. The Type 38 materialized silently in the crook of my arm, magazine already loaded. I tracked his trotting form, the barrel moving in slow sync with his rhythm. Sweat rolled down my temple. The black muzzle held steady on his blinking eyes. Then he stopped. His huge head swung up, nostrils flaring rapidly. Those dull little eyes suddenly blazed with vicious intelligence, fixed right on me. Now, I squeezed the trigger without a fraction of hesitation. The shot cracked through the valley like a thunderclap, shaking snow from every nearby tree. The boar's left eye and the bone around it exploded in a spray of red mist. His massive skull snapped sideways as if struck by an invisible sledgehammer. The impact toppled his entire body, all 700 kilos, crashing to the ground like a collapsing wall. His thick legs kicked and scraped at the frozen earth in violent spasms. The herd went berserk. The nearest sows bristled, saw their leader thrashing on the ground, and something primal ignited, protective rage, raw and absolute. Over a dozen 300-kilo war machines let out deep, guttural roars and charged straight up the slope toward me. Their hooves ripped up chunks of snow and frozen dirt, the combined pounding shaking the ground beneath me like distant thunder. My scalp went numb. There was no time to work the bolt for a second shot. I exploded out of the snow and ran. My legs spun like windmills as I sprinted for my life. I could hear the thunder of hooves closing in behind me, smell the rank animal stench, and feel the hot breath on my back. Over a dozen enraged sows, each 300 kilos of muscle and fury, were gaining fast. If even one of those living battering rams caught me, I'd be trampled into paste. And mountain folk knew wild boars ate meat too. Dying under a pig herd would make me a village joke for the next decade. I'd planned my escape route before firing. 200 meters from my shooting position stood a massive boulder that had split off from the mountainside, about 5 or 6 meters high. I reached it just as the hot breath was practically on my neck. I leaped, grabbed an outcropping with both hands, and my arms and back muscles screamed as I used my momentum to swing upward. My feet kicked off the angled stone face in rapid steps, and in one fluid motion, I hauled myself onto the top. A second later, the sows crashed into the base like a living avalanche. They circled below, roaring and gnashing their tusks against the rock, but the boulder was too steep and smooth. They couldn't climb it. I pulled the Mosin Nagant from storage. From this height, looking down into open mouths full of yellow tusks, I started shooting. The first round punched into the side of the biggest sow's gaping jaw. Blood, broken teeth, and tongue fragments sprayed out. She staggered and crashed sideways into the snow. The barrel swung without pause. Another sow's shoulder blade exploded in a burst of red. Shot after shot, each one answered by a scream and a heavy body hitting the ground. In about 15 seconds, 7 or 8 sows lay thrashing on the bloody slope. The rest finally broke. Their rage gave way to terror, and they milled in confused circles, whimpering, ready to bolt. The piglets crept out of the bushes where they'd been hiding and gathered around their dead father's body, nudging him with soft, pitiful squeals. The Mosin ran dry. I tossed it back into storage and pulled out the Type 38. Standing tall on the boulder now, I picked off the stragglers. One through the hip, another grazed across the neck. Both magazines emptied. 3 surviving sows broke and ran for the deep forest. I reloaded fast and dropped the slowest one. The bullet tore through her lower belly from behind, a devastating hit that sent her crashing into the snow, trailing a gruesome mess. The other 2 disappeared into the trees, one with a neck wound, one with a shattered hind leg. I couldn't let the crippled one escape. I leaped off the boulder, rolled on landing to absorb the impact, and took off running. 3 legs couldn't outrun me, not with my upgraded body. I closed the gap in seconds, launched myself into the air, and landed squarely on the running pig's back. She bucked and screamed, trying to throw me. I clamped my legs around her barrel-shaped body, drew my wood-cutting knife, and let the advanced skill take over. No wild hacking. The blade glided along her body like it was alive. One smooth, impossibly precise cut ran from behind her neck down the spine, all the way to her haunches. Blood and steam erupted from the wound. Her spinal cord severed. Her back legs went dead mid-stride. She crashed forward and slid through the snow on momentum alone, letting out a fading wail. I'd already dismounted cleanly. I walked over, calm and steady, and drove the knife into her throat to finish it. Then I turned my attention to the piglets still huddled around their fallen father. The piglets had no sense of danger. They just kept nuzzling their dead father's body, grunting softly, trying to wake him up. Sorry, little ones. He's not getting back up. I swapped the knife for the Mosin Nagant, loaded 5 rounds, and started shooting. At 50 meters, the small targets were tricky, panicked piglets darting everywhere. I emptied the Mosin, switched to the Type 38, and kept firing until both magazines ran dry. 10 piglets lay still in the snow. The last 2 had bolted along with that wounded sow, gone for good. I walked over to the last mother still twitching on the ground and put her out of her misery with one clean knife stroke. I stood back and took stock of the carnage spread across the mountainside. One massive boar, 16 dead sows, 10 piglets, all safely stored in my frozen time space. The boar I'd quietly swept into storage during the chaos of gunfire, so nobody would ever see that prize. One gutted sow with ruined insides was the last body left on the ground. I cleaned her up as best I could, hung the damaged organs on a branch for the mountain spirit, then stored her too. This was a staggering haul. The boar alone was 600 or 700 kilos. Each sow around 300. The piglets maybe 20 to 25 kilos apiece. A fortune in meat sitting in my pocket dimension, perfectly preserved until I was ready to deal with it. But I needed more ammunition. I'd burned through a lot today. Tomorrow I'd visit Kauai for bullets and spend time pushing my archery toward intermediate level. For now, it was time to go home and put on a show. A few hundred meters from the village, I stopped in a sheltered spot and set up my handmade sled. I pulled out one clean sow and 4 plump piglets, arranging them neatly. About 500 pounds total. A few days ago, dragging that weight through snow would have half killed me. But the advanced knife skill upgrade had transformed more than my technique. My whole body had leveled up. Strength, endurance, everything felt doubled. The sled glided over the hard-packed snow almost easily. When the village came into view, the usual crowd was gathered at the entrance. Old Zhang rubbing his ears, Auntie Lu gesturing wildly, and Taiju leaning on a snow shovel. "Taiju," I called out from a distance. He squinted at me, then walked over. His eyes went dinner plate wide when he saw what was on the sled. "Dongha, is that a wild boar? And piglets? You killed these?" I nodded casually and unslung the Type 38 from my shoulder, handing it back to him. "Only got one sow and a few babies. There was a whole herd up there circling a dead big boar. Some other hunter must have gotten it first. I would have taken more, but I tapped the rifle. Ran out of bullets. Just stood there watching them walk away." Taiju held the gun, speechless, eyes bouncing between the weapon and the loaded sled. The village crowd had heard enough to start buzzing. So he'd been using the village's communal rifle? Took it without much fuss and shot the bullets dry. The murmuring carried a mix of surprise and something sour. Oh, so it was the village gun that did the trick? Lucky kid, basically got a free ride. If any of us had taken that rifle into the mountains, those boars could have been ours. I pretended not to hear the muttering. Instead, I slapped the frozen sow on the sled and called out to Taiju loud enough for everyone to hear. "Taiju, go get the village chief. Ask him, should we set up those 2 big iron stew pots from the collective storehouse and cook this whole boar for the village to share? Or divide the meat by household? Either way, it's up to him." I added that winter was dragging on and nobody had gathered for a proper feast in ages. A pig-killing banquet would lift everyone's spirits. The village went dead silent. Every person who'd been whispering about the borrowed gun stood there with their mouths hanging open. Old Zhang recovered first, stammering. "You're giving away the whole boar? That's over 300 pounds of clean meat after gutting. Split among 100 households. That's 2 or 3 pounds each. More than most families see at New Year." Auntie Lu smacked his arm. "Shut your mouth, Old Zhang. That boy risked his life for this pig. Borrowing a gun and a few bullets. What's that worth? A piglet at most. Making him give away the whole boar? Have you no shame?" The crowd went sheepish. They knew she was right. At the purchasing station, wild boar meat sold for 30 cents a pound. 300 pounds meant 100 yuan. More than most families saved in a year. That sour feeling from moments ago evaporated, replaced by disbelief. I smiled at old Zhang's embarrassed face. "Uncle, you're half right. But we can't just split by household and call it fair. Old Zhao lives alone. Should he get the same as the Li family next door who just split off with 8 kids? That's why the chief needs to decide. I'm leaving this boar right here. However he wants to handle it is fine by me." I pointed at the 4 piglets. "These I'm keeping for my family. My parents are old, my little sister's skin and bones. We need the nutrition." The silence lasted about 2 seconds. Then the village exploded. "Did I hear that? Right? He's really giving away the whole pig. 300 pounds of meat." People were shouting over each other, the earlier jealousy completely drowned by the shock of free pork. Taiju shoved the rifle into someone's arms and sprinted toward his father's house, yelling as he ran. "Pa, Dongha killed a wild boar and he's sharing with the whole village. Auntie Lu grabbed my hand and pinched it, whispering urgently. Dongha, this is 300 or 400 pounds. Your family's situation, we all know it. Nobody would have complained if you just offered a couple piglets. Your mother's going to have a fit when she hears. I appreciated her concern. She'd helped our family many times. But I told her straight, Auntie, when my family hit rock bottom, it was this village that held us up. When Li Ergu and his thugs came to our door, it was the uncles and aunties here who chased them off. If they hadn't, I might have been beaten to death that day and my second uncle badly hurt. I raised my voice so everyone could hear. One pig doesn't come close to repaying that kind of kindness. From now on, if anyone in this village needs help, anything at all, just call my name. Chen Dongha's word is iron. You're all my witnesses. I meant every syllable, and I wanted it public. I was repaying debts, building goodwill, and flipping my reputation all at once. The math made sense too. 300 pounds split among nearly 100 households worked out to barely a pound each. Enough for families to taste meat and feel grateful, but not so much that anyone would start feeling entitled to more. I knew the old saying, a small gift earns gratitude, a big one breeds resentment. I kept 4 piglets for my family, still over 80 pounds of meat. More than enough. And the truly valuable haul, 15 more sows, the giant boar, and 6 remaining piglets, sat safely hidden in my storage space where nobody would ever know. Auntie Lu nodded slowly. The other villagers' expressions were transforming right before my eyes. People who'd been watching with crossed arms and cold stares were now smiling. The women who used to call me a street bum were nudging each other, reevaluating everything they thought they knew. Someone said it out loud. Think about it. Ever since Dongha grew up and became the boss of the village kids, those petty thieves stopped causing trouble. Even the ones the production team leader couldn't control, he straightened out. The whole mood shifted. Where there'd been suspicion and jealousy minutes ago, now there was respect. And that was exactly what I'd been aiming for. Old Zhang stepped forward, his wrinkled face beaming. Dongha, you've got guts and heart. From now on, if anyone comes looking for trouble with your family, they'll have to go through these old bones first. Auntie Lu backed him up at full volume. What did I tell everyone? This boy's got loyalty. All our village kids can walk through neighboring villages without getting bullied. And who do you think keeps them safe? I scratched the back of my head, a bit embarrassed by the praise. I couldn't exactly tell them that I used to know every petty thug in a 10-mile radius because they'd considered me one of their own. I was the fighting type, not a thief, but I'd run with the kind of guys who shook people down on back roads for pocket money. A cold sweat broke out on my back thinking about it. In about a year, the government crackdown would begin, and people like that would get crushed without mercy. If I'd kept going down that road, I'd have been swept up too. This new path, the hunter's path, was the right one. The crowd practically shoved me aside and took over hauling the sled. Taiju sprinted to fetch the village chief. Someone carefully carried the Type 38 back like it was made of glass. I grabbed my 4 piglets and headed home. I told my parents everything. Well, the edited version. My mother's eyes filled with that familiar mix of heartache and pride. My boy, that meat was bought with your life. She reached toward me, wanting to check for injuries, but settled for smoothing a wrinkle on my jacket. But you've really grown up. Looking after the family and the whole village too. She turned to my father with damp eyes. Say something. Our sons turned out amazing. My father set down his pipe with slightly trembling hands. His face was pure pride. Good. You're a real man. Brave and smart. Better than your old man ever was. I went into those mountains too when I was young, but I never brought back anything like this. That hit me right in the chest. I threw my arm around his shoulders and grinned. Pa, it's all because of you. If you hadn't taught me to use a slingshot and bow when I was little, I'd never have learned to shoot straight. If you hadn't taken me into the forest and taught me the trails, I'd never have dared go into the deep woods. I gave him all the credit on purpose. He deserved to feel proud. My mother wiped her eyes, then zeroed in on what I'd let slip. She grabbed my arm and whispered, You said there was an even bigger one? A boar over 500 pounds? Are you serious? Let me see. Are you hurt anywhere? She started patting me down, checking my back, convinced I was hiding injuries. My father's pipe nearly hit the floor again as he stared at me. I spun in a circle to prove I was fine, then launched into my carefully crafted version of the hunt. I told them I hadn't gone deep at all, just planned to grab a few rabbits near the forest edge. Stumbled onto the herd by pure luck. spotted a huge pine tree, climbed up before they noticed me, and picked them off from the safety of the branches. The big boar went down first with a shot through the eye. The sows panicked and started ramming the tree, which didn't hurt them much, but made them easy targets. The piglets got confused and ran into the roots below me. I made it sound like the luckiest day of easy shooting. I left out the part where I belly crawled through snow, got charged by a wall of enraged sows, sprinted for my life, leaped onto a boulder with hooves thundering behind me, and rode a crippled pig like a horse while slicing it open with a knife. If my father knew I'd deliberately picked a fight with a herd that could have trampled me into paste, he'd never sleep again. And if my mother found out, she'd reach for the feather duster. I still remembered her crying while she whacked me as a kid, which somehow hurt worse than the actual beating. Every time I'd sworn never to cause trouble again, and every time I'd forgotten the promise within a day. Looking back on my previous life, I'd put those two through absolute hell. Not this time. My mother was still shaken. Don't you ever be that reckless again. Those boars can kill you with one kick. Is it hidden in your old spot? She meant the small cave my father and I had found years ago, tucked behind a rock face. Well hidden. I nodded quickly and told her I'd sealed the entrance with branches and brush. My plan was to borrow Third Aunt's donkey cart, load up 2 piglets as cover, and head to the county before dawn to sell the big boar along with everything else. I started listing what I wanted to buy: a new cotton jacket for my second sister whose sleeves were worn through, a pretty new coat for Xiaoya who was still wearing my hand-me-downs covered in patches. A smack landed on the back of my head. Stop wasting money, my mother snapped. Your sister's jacket still has thick cotton. It's warm enough. And your little sister doesn't need pretty things. She's just a kid. Don't you dare buy anything. Bring every single coin back to me. That money was earned with your blood. She shot a warning look at my father. He immediately fell in line. Listen to your mother. You want to marry Li Shui properly, don't you? You think your reputation is clean? Yesterday helped, but her mother watches everything. The bride gifts better be respectable. And her uncles, remember them? They'll beat you senseless if you show up empty-handed. I almost laughed. My mother had trained all my sisters to put their brother first, and Xiaoya would end up the same way if nobody stepped in. I was the family's precious boy. Everyone's love piled on me. That love made me more determined than ever to be the rock my sisters could lean on and give my parents the peaceful old age they deserved. I glanced at Xiaoya in the corner. She was quietly tugging at the frayed sleeve of her faded little coat, the one I'd outgrown years ago, patched over and over. When she caught me looking, she pulled her hand back and tried to hide the disappointment on her face. I didn't dare argue. My mother had just made a new feather duster from the pheasant I'd brought home yesterday. Talk about digging my own grave. Yes, Ma. Yes, Pa. Whatever you say. I agreed out loud, but in my mind the decision was already made. I'd buy Xiaoya that coat no matter what. Once it was home, my mother wouldn't throw it out. She'd scold me for a while, and that would be the end of it. Honestly, being fussed over by my parents like this felt like a kind of happiness I'd missed my entire previous life. My father tapped his pipe on the edge of the bed and changed the subject, his voice turning serious. When you go to the county tomorrow, stop by your big sister's place. He told me not to worry about bringing money from him. Over the years, my eldest sister had been secretly sending us whatever she could scrape together. A handful of grain here, a few eggs there, all saved from her own meals. Her husband Lu Chong was an honest, quiet man, not stupid, just poor beyond words. His parents had both died, leaving 2 teenage brothers and 3 unmarried sisters for him and my big sister to support. The 2 of them hadn't dared have children of their own. Every scrap of food went to raising that brood. He managed to send us 50 yuan when we were in trouble, my father said. That came from your sister's sweat and sacrifice in that household. We owe them. We can't let her keep losing face with her in-laws. My mother started crying softly. Our poor girl hasn't had a single easy day since she married. No hot meals, no proper sleep. My father's voice went gruff. She chose her own path. We told her to wait for a better family, but she was dead set on marrying that poor boy. What could we do? Beat them apart. He was angry at her stubbornness, but heartbroken underneath. He even grumbled about how every time Big Sister visited, she brought her husband's 2 younger brothers along like bodyguards. She was afraid we'd look down on her husband's family. Does she think we're that kind of people? I thought about my big sister, stubborn and proud on the surface, scared and self-sacrificing underneath. and those two stocky teenage boys who always watched me with suspicious, protective eyes whenever she visited. It was funny and painful at the same time. Don't worry, Palma. I'll go tomorrow. It's not far. I'll eat lunch there. I'll take 2 of the piglets for her family. They can raise them or butcher them, whatever they need. Those 2 boys of hers are growing fast and need the nutrition. It's time I got to know them better anyway. In my previous life, I owed those boys more than I could say. This time around, I'd start paying it back early. I'd barely finished speaking when the old village chief's booming voice came from outside our gate, full of cheer. Dongha, bring your folks. We're going to divide the meat. The old village chief's voice boomed from outside, bursting with pride. I knew I had you figured right. You're a real man, generous and loyal. Everyone who takes your meat today owes your family. That's the old rule. He grabbed my arm and practically dragged me to the village collective building. My second sister and Xiaoya had already run ahead. The whole village was buzzing like it was New Year's Eve. When I arrived, I was met with a wall of smiling faces. Even old Lee the accountant, who used to cross the street to avoid me, was grinning at me. In 2 lifetimes, I'd never been praised like this by so many people at once. I didn't know what to do with myself except laugh. The chief raised his hand for silence and announced the plan. Half the meat would be divided by head count, with larger shares going to families with more mouths and fewer workers, about half a pound per person. The other half, bones and all, would go into the 2 big iron stew pots from the collective storehouse. Crack the bones open, simmer them for hours, throw in whatever vegetables people could bring, potatoes, radishes, cabbage. A village-wide feast. And every bit of this, he slapped my shoulder hard enough to sting, is thanks to Dongha? Does everyone here accept that? The crowd roared back. Kids jumped up and down. The noise probably carried to the next village. The celebration went on for hours. 2 enormous pots, each 1.5 meters across, sat on hastily built brick stoves, bubbling away. The smell of stewing wild boar drifted over the entire village. Old folks who usually went to bed early came hobbling out on canes. The men gathered around smoking and swapping stories. Experienced butchers supervised the young men on how to cut the meat evenly. Half-grown boys crowded around me, eyes full of hero worship, begging for details about the hunt and asking if they could come along next time. When the chief finally shouted, "Pots are open," everyone surged forward. 1 pot held potatoes soaked through with pork broth. The other had soft radish strips floating in golden oil with dried chili peppers. People who hadn't tasted meat in months stood there with cracked bowls, eyes glowing. Children tugged at their parents' sleeves, unable to wait another second. Each family got their strip of fatty meat and wrapped it carefully in leaves or oiled paper, tucking it into their deepest pocket like treasure. People blew on their steaming bowls and slurped the hot broth with looks of pure bliss. The party lasted past 10 at night. The chief told everyone to leave the pots out. Tomorrow morning, add water and whatever leftover rice people could scrape together, boil it into another round of rich soup. Nothing wasted. I noticed Li Shui slip away quietly toward home, her thin figure shivering in the wind. I followed. She was just closing her gate when I caught the door. She startled, then saw it was me and broke into a warm smile. "Come in. It's freezing out here. My mom was just saying the bear meat you gave us was way too much." I stayed at the doorway and peered inside. The main room was dark, but a faint kerosene glow came from the back room along with muffled coughing. "Your mother didn't come to the feast. Is her old illness acting up again?" Li Shui's eyes dimmed. "She doesn't like crowds. Too many people make it hard for her to breathe, and she didn't want her coughing to ruin the mood. I brought her back a bowl of bone soup and potatoes. It's warming on the little stove by her bed." Her voice dropped softer. "And when you were serving soup earlier, you hid a piece of leg meat at the bottom of my bowl." I noticed. I smiled and brought my hand from behind my back. A thick bundle wrapped in oiled paper. "This is for your mom. To help her get stronger." My voice turned serious. "When spring comes and the snow melts and the roads clear up, I'm borrowing a cart and taking you and your mother to the city hospital. She needs proper treatment. That cough can't just be ignored forever. Don't worry about money. I've got it covered." Li Shui looked at the package in my hand, then at something hanging from the rifle barrel on my shoulder. Her eyes went wide, and she covered her mouth in surprise. Li Shui couldn't believe I'd brought her a cleaned hazel grouse, the legendary flying dragon. She'd only tasted one once at her uncle's house and never forgot it. Her uncle had said they were nearly impossible to catch and worth over 10 yuan at a state restaurant 2 years ago. On the black market now, probably over 20. She tried to push it back. This is too expensive. 20-something yuan could buy so much grain. I grabbed her cold little hand and held it firm. Listen, we're officially together now. The whole village knows it. You're going to be my wife. Feeding my wife something good is the most natural thing in the world. 20 yuan, 200. If you want it, I'll get it without blinking. Her face turned crimson from cheeks to ears. She tried to pull her hand free, but I held on, wrapping her cold fingers in my warm palm. I told her softly that when everyone else in the village avoided me and wrote me off, she was the only one who stayed. I've made up my mind, Shue. You're the one. Take this home and make soup for your mother. She needs good food. Weak stomach, bad cough, can't sleep. Then I leaned closer, voice dropping low. That's my future mother-in-law. I'm counting on her to be healthy enough to help us watch the kids someday. She bit her lip, face burning, heart pounding so hard I could practically hear it. She looked so beautiful in the moonlight that I nearly kissed her right there. We talked for a long while at her doorway. In the end, I didn't go inside. Too late at night, and we weren't married yet. No need to start rumors. When I finally walked home, I was still grinning from the shy little kiss she'd given me before I left. Before dawn the next morning, my mother had already gone to borrow third aunt's donkey cart. She was the right person to knock on the door that early. My father and I couldn't go banging on a woman's door in the dark. Third aunt, generous as always, hitched up her gray donkey without complaint. My father wanted to come along to help haul the hidden boar, worried it was too heavy for me alone. I firmly refused. I told him his bad leg needed rest after yesterday's excitement. The real reason, of course, was that everything was sitting safely in my storage space. Having him along would only mean I'd have to put on a performance of finding and loading things from a fake hiding spot. I set out alone in the freezing pre-dawn darkness, bundled on the cart, listening to the wheels crunch over frozen ground and the donkey snorting clouds of white breath. An hour and a half later, I was near Kuei's area, but I'd changed my plans. My father's words about Big Sister had weighed on me all night. Hunting could wait any day, she couldn't. Our family was finally eating meat and living decently. I couldn't let her keep suffering in silence at her in-laws, scraping food from her own bowl to secretly send home while enduring resentment from the younger siblings she was raising. I also planned to take her husband's 2 teenage brothers into the forest for a short trip, show them what I could do, build some trust. Every time those boys visited with Big Sister, they looked at me like I was a parasite bleeding their family dry. Time to change that. About a mile from Lu family village, I stopped the cart in a sheltered spot behind some tall dead brambles. Nobody around. I pulled a large sow from storage, about 150 pounds, and split it into 2 thick sides with my knife. Then I took out 2 skinned, frost-dusted rabbits and a colorful pheasant. Everything went neatly on the cart, covered with an old burlap sack and topped with a bundle of firewood for camouflage. I climbed back onto the cart, cracked the whip, and headed for my big sister's village. I arrived at Lu family village just after dawn. Most people were still in bed, but a few old folks sat hunched on doorsteps, sipping thin cornmeal porridge in the cold. They spotted me right away. A toothless old woman set down her bowl and started in with the gossip, loud enough to carry on the wind. There's that Chin boy again. Come to squeeze more out of his brother-in-law. An old man chimed in about my 300 yuan debt, how I'd borrowed bits and pieces from this village. 50 cents here, a yuan there, over 50 yuan total. He shook his head like my sister's husband Lu Chong was the biggest fool alive for marrying into our family. Another woman said if it were her household, she'd have beaten out a daughter-in-law who kept feeding her worthless brother. They talked about me like I was a leech on my sister's back. None of them stopped to think about what my big sister actually did for that family. She was the first one up and the last one to bed every single day. She cooked, cleaned, mended clothes, and raised Lu Chong's 2 teenage brothers and 3 young sisters, all without a single decent piece of clothing of her own. She and Lu Chong hadn't even dared have children because she couldn't afford to be off her feet for a month during the pregnancy, and she refused to bring a baby into a house that could barely feed the mouths already there. She decided to wait until the younger brothers were old enough to earn money. That's the kind of woman my big sister was. I kept the cart moving, pine branches covering the 2 big sides of pork underneath. Then I heard shouting behind me. Two half-grown boys came charging out of the morning mist, Lu Erqiang and Lu Sanxiang, my brother-in-law's younger brothers. The older one was taller, leading the charge. The younger one followed with a face red as a beet. Their father had been illiterate and named all his sons with the same character 4, strong, just added a number in front. Simple country naming. I actually smiled seeing them. These two had never given me anything but dirty looks and attitude. If they weren't my big sisters-in-laws, I'd have straightened them out long ago. No manners at all, I said, slow and easy. My sister is your elder brother's wife. That makes me your brother-in-law. The least you could do is call me brother. Call you brother? You don't deserve it. Erqiang was shaking with rage, voice cracking, barely holding back tears. If it weren't for you, our sister-in-law's life would be 100 times better. What do you want this time? Haven't you done enough damage? Sanxiang's eyes were red as a rabbit's. He glared at the donkey cart behind me. You brought a cart this time? What? Scraping us dry wasn't enough before. You want to haul away whatever's left? There's nothing. You already emptied us out. He sniffed hard, a teenager's fury tangled up with raw hurt. If you were any kind of man, you'd handle your own mess instead of dragging everyone else down. Does our sister-in-law owe you something? How dare you even show your face here? I raised an eyebrow at their furious faces and the misunderstood cart. Calm down. I'm not here to take anything. Sanxiang's voice shot up like I'd told a joke. Not here to take? Then what? You're here to give. Has the sun started rising in the west? Who do you think you're fooling? Erqiang spat on the ground. Everyone in your village knows what kind of person you are. A weasel doesn't visit the henhouse to say Happy New Year. The village crowd pounced on that. A white-bearded old man shouted that a gift from me was about as believable as snow in July. A woman in a blue headscarf said I must have cooked up some new scheme. A dark-faced man stepped forward and pointed at the cart, demanding I show what I was hiding under those branches.